I was sent to capture an alien in Area 53, but what I saw looked like an angel, sent by God. The phone screamed at 3:17 a.m., ripping through the darkness like a blade through silk. Mike Donovan's hand shot out instinctively, years of military conditioning overriding the fog of sleep. His fingers found the vibrating device on the nightstand, knocking over the half-empty glass of water he'd left there. The screen glowed with a single word: blocked. No caller ID, no number. Just that sterile, impersonal label that in his line of work usually meant one thing: someone didn't want to be traced. He answered without speaking, pressing the cold glass against his ear, while his other hand reached beneath the pillow where his Glock 19 rested. The bedroom was silent, except for Sarah's steady breathing beside him and the low hum of the ceiling fan cutting through the Tennessee summer heat. Outside, crickets sang their endless song, oblivious to the fact that everything was about to change. Mike's heart rate hadn't increased. 10 years as a Marine had taught him to keep his pulse steady, even when his instincts screamed danger. But something felt wrong. Calls at this hour were never good news. The voice on the other end wasn't human. At least it didn't sound human. It was mechanical, synthesized, stripped of every identifying characteristic that might reveal gender, age, or origin. Sergeant Michael James Donovan, service number 2 to 774198. Code Red Seraphim. Mike's blood went cold. Code Red Seraphim wasn't in any manual he'd ever read, and he'd read them all during his decade of service. The voice continued without waiting for confirmation. Report to Hangar Delta 7, Edwards Air Force Base, California. 0600 hours. Come alone. Bring no communications devices. Tell no one. This is not a request. The line went dead before Mike could respond, leaving only the hollow buzz of disconnection. He pulled the phone from his ear and stared at the screen. The call had lasted exactly 14 seconds. Already, the blocked number was disappearing from his recent calls log, erasing itself as if it had never existed. His thumb hovered over the redial button, but instinct told him it would be useless. Whoever had called him had made sure this conversation would leave no trace. Mike sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, and for a moment he was no longer in Tennessee. He was back in Kandahar, August 2014, dust in his mouth and the taste of copper on his tongue, the smell of burning fuel and something worse, something human. He'd grown up in a Baptist household where Sunday service was mandatory and dinner prayers were sacred. His grandmother had pressed a pocket Bible into his hands before his first deployment, whispering that God would protect him. But God hadn't protected the 23 civilians who died when the intelligence was wrong. God hadn't stopped the children from being in that building. God hadn't answered when Mike screamed into the desert night, demanding to know why. After that day, the Bible stayed in his footlocker, unopened. Church became a memory. Prayer became a word that tasted like ash. His mother still asked if he'd found his way back to the Lord, and every time he told her he was working on it, a comfortable lie that let her sleep at night. The truth was simpler and harder. Mike had stopped believing in divine intervention the moment he'd carried a girl no older than Emma out of the rubble. Who was that? Sarah's voice cut through the darkness, groggy but alert. The voice of a military wife who'd learned to wake at the slightest disturbance. Mike turned to see her propped up on one elbow, blonde hair catching the moonlight filtering through the curtains. He forced his expression into something approximating calm, knowing she could read him better than anyone. Just a briefing call. Nothing serious. The lie tasted familiar, comfortable. How many times had he fed her these same reassurances? Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he thought she'd push back, demand the truth. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm, her fingers warm against his cooling skin. When do you leave? Her voice carried resignation, acceptance, the price of loving a man who belonged to something larger than family. Few hours. I'll be back by tomorrow afternoon, I promise. Emma's birthday party is at 3, right? I wouldn't miss it. Sarah nodded slowly, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. How many promises had he made over the years? How many had he kept? Just, be careful, Mike, whatever this is. She didn't say what they both knew, that careful wasn't always enough. Mike stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching his daughter sleep in the pale glow of her nightlight, a plastic moon that cast gentle shadows across her unicorn-covered walls. She was 6 years old, gap-toothed and wild-haired, with Sarah's eyes and his stubborn chin. Her small chest rose and fell with the deep, peaceful rhythm of childhood sleep. One arm wrapped around a stuffed giraffe she'd named Mr. Tallman. On her nightstand, next to a half-finished glass of water and a stack of picture books, sat a children's Bible with illustrated stories, a gift from his mother that Sarah had embraced even as Mike had pulled away. The book was worn at the edges, clearly well-loved and frequently read. Mike felt something twist in his chest, a mixture of love and guilt so intense it was almost physical. What kind of father was he, teaching his daughter to believe in something he'd rejected? But when he'd suggested they stop the bedtime Bible stories, Sarah had looked at him with such fierce protectiveness that he'd backed down immediately. "Just because you're angry at God doesn't mean Emma can't know him," she'd said. Mike had no argument for that. He crossed the room silently, his sock feet making no sound on the carpet, and bent down to kiss Emma's forehead. Her skin was warm and soft, smelling faintly of the strawberry shampoo Sarah used during bath time. "Sweet dreams, princess," he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. Emma stirred slightly, murmuring something that sounded like, "Love you, Daddy," before settling back into deeper sleep. Mike straightened, his hand lingering on her small shoulder for just a moment longer. As he turned to leave, his eye caught on the children's Bible again, and something made him pick it up. The cover was decorated with cartoon animals marching 2 by 2 onto Noah's Ark, colorful and cheerful and utterly disconnected from the harsh realities Mike had witnessed. He flipped it open to a random page and found himself staring at an illustration of an angel, white-robed, golden-haired, benevolent, with enormous white wings spread wide. The caption read, "Angels are God's messengers who watch over us." Mike felt his jaw tighten. If angels were watching, they were doing a piss-poor job. He closed the book carefully and set it back exactly where it had been, as if he'd never touched it at all. By 4:30 a.m., Mike was on the road, his old Ford F-150 eating up the empty highway miles between Tennessee and California. Edwards Air Force Base was a 26-hour drive under normal circumstances, but the orders had been clear, 600 hours. That meant he had less than 2 hours to cover impossible distance. The mystery deepened when he pulled out the phone that had received the call. The number was still gone from his history, but a new notification had appeared. A text message with coordinates in a single line. "GPS will guide you. Trust the route." Against every instinct, he'd entered the coordinates into his truck's navigation system. The route it calculated made no sense. Back roads, service routes, paths that shouldn't have connected. But when he'd tried to verify the directions on his personal phone, it showed nothing but error messages. The military phone's GPS, however, worked perfectly, displaying a route that should have been impossible. Mike had seen enough classified operations to know when something was beyond standard protocol. This wasn't just secret, this was something else entirely. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up and his marine instincts scream warnings he couldn't quite articulate. Edwards Air Force Base materialized out of the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost rising from the desert floor. Mike showed his credentials at 3 separate checkpoints, each one more heavily armed than the last, before being directed to a section of the base he'd never seen on any map. "Hangar Delta 7, he'd told the final guard, a stone-faced specialist whose name tape read, "Morrison." The guard had gone pale, actually pale, and checked his tablet 3 times before nodding. "Follow the yellow line, sir. Don't deviate. Don't stop. Don't take any photographs. When you reach the hangar, enter your coordinates into the keypad." Mike followed the painted yellow line across tarmac that looked newer than the surrounding concrete, past hangars that were clearly marked with letters and numbers that made sense. A1, B4, C9. But there was no Delta 7 visible anywhere. The yellow line led him to what appeared to be nothing more than empty desert floor, heat-cracked and ordinary. Then Mike pulled out his phone, opened the GPS, and watched as the coordinates centered directly on the spot where he stood. His finger moved almost without conscious thought, entering the numbers into the keypad that appeared on his phone's screen. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath his feet groaned, split, and began to descend. The elevator descended for what felt like an eternity, though Mike's watch insisted it was only 43 seconds. No music, no corporate comfort, just the mechanical grind of gears and the sensation of his stomach dropping as the platform sank deeper into the earth. The walls were reinforced steel, thick enough to survive a direct nuclear strike, with no buttons, no emergency stop, no escape hatch. Mike counted the depth markers as they flashed past. 10 meters, 20, 25, 30. The air grew colder with each passing meter, and his ears popped twice from the pressure change. When the elevator finally shuddered to a stop, the doors didn't open immediately. Instead, a red light bathed the interior and a mechanical voice announced, "Biometric scan in progress. Remain still." A laser grid materialized from the ceiling, passing over Mike's face, his retinas, his hands. 3 seconds of analysis, then a soft chime. Identity confirmed. Sergeant Michael James Donovan. Clearance, Omega 7. Welcome to Area 53, Sublevel 1. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a corridor that belonged in a science fiction film, not beneath the California desert. A woman in a crisp Air Force uniform stood waiting, tablet in hand, her expression professionally blank. "Sergeant Donovan, follow me. They're waiting." She didn't offer a handshake, didn't introduce herself, just turned and walked with the precision of someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times. Mike followed through corridors lined with brushed steel and recessed lighting that cast everything in harsh, clinical white. They passed sealed doors marked with designations he'd never seen. Xenobiology Lab 7, Containment Chamber B12, Mimetic Hazard Storage, Level 4 authorization required. Each door had a small window of reinforced glass, but most were covered from the inside. Through one uncovered window, Mike glimpsed what looked like a perfectly spherical object floating in midair, surrounded by monitoring equipment and scientists in full hazmat suits. The woman noticed his glance. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered, Sergeant. What you see here doesn't leave here. Ever." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen colleagues disappear for talking too much. Mike filed away a dozen questions he'd never get to ask, and kept walking. The briefing room was smaller than Mike expected, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with a conference table that could seat 8 but currently held only 3 people. The walls were lined with screens, all currently dark, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and coffee. General Blackwood sat at the head of the table, a man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair cut military short, and eyes that had seen things that aged you faster than time. To his right sat a woman of Asian descent, mid-40s, wearing a white lab coat over civilian clothes. Dr. Chen, according to the name badge clipped to her pocket. To Blackwood's left, Colonel Hayes, a lean man with the coiled tension of a spring wound too tight, his jaw working methodically on a piece of gum. All three looked up as Mike entered, and he saw something in their expressions that made his combat instincts flare. Fear. Not the healthy respect for danger that kept soldiers alive, but genuine, bone-deep fear. "Sergeant Donovan," Blackwood's voice was gravelly, roughened by too many years of barking orders and breathing recycled air. "Sit down. You're going to want to be sitting for this." Mike pulled out the chair directly across from the general and sat, keeping his back straight, his hands visible on the table. Whatever was coming, he'd face it like a Marine. Blackwood didn't waste time with pleasantries. He tapped a control panel embedded in the table, and the screens on the walls flickered to life, all showing the same image. A timestamp reading 14:23:17, a corridor that looked similar to the ones Mike had just walked through, and a camera angle positioned near the ceiling. This footage was recorded yesterday at 2:23 p.m. Level 9, Section Delta. The general's finger hovered over another button. "What you're about to see is classified beyond top secret. It's classified beyond anything you've ever been cleared for. 19 people have seen this footage. 7 of them are dead. The rest, including everyone in this room, have been having nightmares since." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her voice carrying a slight accent. "Mandarin," Mike guessed. "Sergeant, before we show you this, I need to ask, do you have any history of seizures, psychotic episodes, or severe psychological trauma responses?" Mike thought about Kandahar, about the night terrors that still woke him up sweating. "I've seen combat, Doctor. I can handle whatever you're about to show me." Dr. Chen and Blackwood exchanged a look. "That's what the others said," Hayes muttered, still chewing his gum. Blackwood pressed play. The footage started normally enough. An empty corridor, fluorescent lights humming their eternal song, the faint sound of ventilation systems pushing air through sterile spaces. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the lights began to flicker, not the random flicker of electrical problems, but a rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat. The timestamp continued. 14:23:22, 14:23:23, 14:23:24. At 14:23:25, the temperature gauge in the corner of the screen began to rise. 72 degrees, 75 degrees, 82 degrees, 95 degree. Phi. The corridor itself began to brighten, but not from the overhead lights. The illumination was coming from something off-screen, something approaching from the left side of the frame. The camera started to shake, subtly at first, then more violently, as if the entire facility was experiencing an earthquake. But Mike had felt no tremors in the elevator, seen no damage in the corridors. This shaking was localized, focused. At 14:23:31, it entered the frame. Mike's breath caught in his throat. His rational mind tried to process what he was seeing and failed completely. It was humanoid, roughly the shape and size of a tall human being, but that's where the similarity ended. It didn't walk. It floated approximately 6 inches above the floor, moving with the smooth, inevitable glide of something that had never known gravity. The entity was luminous, not glowing like a light bulb or LED, but radiating light the way a star radiates heat, from within and through every surface. Its form was difficult to focus on. The camera struggled to adjust exposure, alternating between washed-out brightness and shadow. But Mike could make out details, limbs that were too long, too perfect in their proportion, a torso that seemed to exist in 3 dimensions, and somehow more than 3 dimensions simultaneously. And the head, Mike's throat went dry. The head was turned away from the camera, facing forward as the entity moved down the corridor with terrifying purpose. Temperature peaked at 127 degrees Fahrenheit, Dr. Chen narrated, her voice clinically detached in the way scientists used when describing things that terrified them. All electronic equipment within a 50-foot radius experienced catastrophic failure. Battery-powered devices drained instantaneously. The emergency lights, hardwired to independent power sources, went dark. This entity generates an electromagnetic field we cannot measure with current technology because it breaks our instruments. On screen, the figure continued its glide, passing beneath the camera. For just a moment, Mike glimpsed what might have been wings, or the suggestion of wings, folded against the entity's back. 6 of them. Then it passed out of frame, moving toward something the camera couldn't see. Toward Level 9's containment chambers. Toward the scientists who would die trying to stop it. Blackwood fast-forwarded through 3 minutes of empty corridor before switching to a different camera angle. This is Containment Chamber 9 Delta. 7 of our best people, physicists, biologists, xenology specialists, were working on Project Seraphim when the entity breached the facility. The new footage showed a large circular room, maybe 60 feet in diameter, with walls lined with monitoring equipment, computer terminals, and what looked like medical equipment. 7 people in white lab coats moved with practiced efficiency around a central glass cylinder that dominated the room. The timestamp read 14:26:43. They had approximately 3 minutes to prepare, Hayes added, his gum chewing intensifying. We sounded the alarm, initiated lockdown protocols, armed them with every non-lethal containment measure we have. On screen, the scientists were suiting up. Not hazmat suits, but something else. Something that shimmered like heat waves. Faraday suits, Dr. Chen explained, designed to insulate against electromagnetic radiation. They should have been protected. Should have. Past tense. Mike watched as one of the scientists, a tall man with graying hair, moved to the chamber entrance, holding what looked like a modified taser. The others formed a perimeter, each holding similar devices. They were ready. They were professionals. They were about to die. The entity didn't burst through the door. It simply appeared, materializing in the center of the room, as if reality had briefly forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. All 7 scientists froze. The weapons fell from their hands, clattering to the floor with dull metallic sounds the camera barely picked up. Then, one by one, they dropped to their knees, not violently, gently, as if the strings holding them upright had been cut by the world's kindest puppeteer. Their faces, Mike could see their faces now, caught by the room's internal cameras, showed expressions he'd never seen before, and hoped never to see again. Terror and ecstasy woven together, fear and rapture occupying the same space in the human face. 2 of them were crying, one was smiling. Another had his mouth open in a silent scream or prayer or both. They died within 90 seconds. Dr. Chen's voice was barely a whisper now. Cardiac arrest, all of them. But their final brain scans showed something impossible. Activity levels 300% above normal. They weren't dying in pain. They were dying in absolute. She struggled for the word. Transcendence. Blackwood froze the image on the final frame. The entity, still luminous and terrible, turning its head, if that's what it was, directly toward the camera, directly toward Mike, sitting in a briefing room 30 meters above, watching footage from yesterday. And in that frozen moment, Mike felt something he couldn't explain, the sensation of being seen, not through the camera, through time itself, through the recording, through the screen, through the layers of reality that separated that moment from this one. A presence pressed against his consciousness, like a hand against frosted glass. And then he heard it, a voice that bypassed his ears entirely and spoke directly into his mind, a whisper that made his bones vibrate and his vision blur. Miguel. Mike stood in the armory on sublevel 2, watching 6 of the most lethal operators he'd ever worked with gear up for a mission none of them understood. Sergeant Carlos Ramirez checked his equipment with the methodical precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Marsoc, 3 tours in Syria, built like a fire hydrant with a cross tattooed on his right forearm. Corporal David Jackson, former Delta, tall and rangy with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much, was loading non-lethal rounds into a modified rifle that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Navy SEAL, one of the first women to make it through Budus, was calibrating an electromagnetic sensor that beeped softly as she adjusted its settings. Staff Sergeant Anton Volkov, ex-Spetsnaz who'd defected and joined the U.S. military, stood silently checking a bandolier of what looked like oversized flashbangs. Dr. Marcus Silva, not military but former Army medic turned field scientist, was organizing medical supplies with practiced efficiency. And Technical Sergeant William Wright, combat engineer and the closest thing this team had to a tech expert, was running diagnostics on equipment Mike didn't recognize. Alpha Team, Mike announced, his voice cutting through the quiet preparation. Listen up. They gathered around him, 6 faces that had seen combat, death, and things that made normal people wake up screaming. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know exactly what we're hunting. Mike paused, letting that sink in. What I do know is that 7 scientists died yesterday trying to contain it. What I do know is that it generates an electromagnetic field that breaks our instruments. What I do know is that it's still down there, level 9, and we've been tasked with live capture. Jackson raised an eyebrow. Boss, what exactly are we hunting? They show you any footage? Mike remembered the entity, the floating, the light, the voice in his head. Miguel. He pushed the memory down. Something that looks humanoid but isn't. Something that doesn't follow normal physics. Something that killed 7 people without laying a hand on them. Ramirez made the sign of the cross. Forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder. The gesture automatic, instinctive. A couple of the others smirked nervously, the way soldiers do when confronted with the supernatural. But Volkov, the Russian, didn't smile. He just nodded slowly, as if Mike had confirmed something he'd already suspected. In old country, we have stories, Volkov said quietly. Things that glow, things that kill with looking. We call them, he searched for the English word, divine. The equipment they'd been issued wasn't standard military gear. The suits looked like hazmat gear crossed with medieval armor, thick reinforced material that Dr. Chen had called Faraday weave, designed to insulate against electromagnetic radiation up to levels that would normally fry human nervous systems. Each suit had a heads-up display inside the helmet, showing temperature, radiation levels, electromagnetic field strength, and biometric data for the wearer. The weapons were stranger still. Kinetic impact rifles that fired dense polymer rounds designed to incapacitate without penetrating, useless against body armor, perfect for targets you couldn't risk killing. They had flashbangs modified to emit specific frequency pulses. They had net launchers loaded with conductive mesh, and each team member carried a small device about the size of a smartphone, matte black with a single red button. Theta devices, Wright explained, holding one up. Electromagnetic pulse generators, but highly focused, pointed at the target, press the button, and theoretically it should freeze any bioelectric field within a 3-meter radius. He didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Theoretically? Kim asked. Wright shrugged. Never been field tested. The scientists who designed it died yesterday before they could run trials. Wonderful, Mike thought. They were going into combat with untested equipment against an enemy that had already killed 7 people. Just another Tuesday. The descent began at 800 hours. 7 operators in full gear, Mike had joined his team, crammed into an industrial elevator that groaned under their combined weight. The elevator shaft was vast, easily 15 feet across, with thick cables visible through the metal grating beneath their feet. As they descended, Mike watched the level indicators flash past. L1, L2, L3. Levels 1 through 3 are standard operations, Mike briefed, reading from notes Dr. Chen had provided. Personnel working on conventional classified projects, satellite technology, advanced aircraft design, cryptography. Nothing we haven't seen before. True enough, when the elevator slowed at level 2, Mike could see through the small window a floor that looked like any other military research facility. Scientists in lab coats, computer terminals, coffee machines, fluorescent lights. Normal, almost aggressively normal. But as they descended to level 4, the atmosphere changed. The scientists visible through the level 4 window wore different badges, red instead of blue. Armed guards stood at attention every 20 feet. The lighting shifted from white to a slightly yellow hue. Level 4 through 6, Mike continued. Advanced projects, reverse-engineered foreign technology, experimental weapons systems, things that would cause international incidents if they leaked. He didn't mention what Dr. Chen had whispered. Things we don't fully understand yet. Level 5 briefly came into view through the elevator window, and what Mike saw made his combat instincts flare. A room visible through reinforced glass contained what looked like a perfectly intact aircraft of unknown origin. Not American, not Russian, not Chinese, not anything Mike recognized from any intelligence briefing. Its hull was seamless, no visible rivets or welding. The metal a strange color that seemed to shift between silver and gold, depending on how the light hit it. 3 scientists in full containment suits were taking measurements while armed guards watched from behind blast shields. Jesus, Jackson breathed. Is that... Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Mike cut him off, echoing the words the escort had told him earlier. But they were all thinking it. UFO. Actual, genuine, unidentified flying object. Which meant the conspiracy theorists were right about at least one thing. The government had recovered something not from Earth. Or, Mike's rational mind suggested, something so advanced it might as well be alien. Level 6 flashed past too quickly to see details, but Mike caught a glimpse of what looked like a massive vault door, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Not English, not any language he'd seen. Ramirez crossed himself again. This time, nobody laughed. The temperature began to drop at level 7. Not gradually, suddenly, like walking into a freezer. The suit's HUD showed the change, 72 degrees to 57 degrees in less than 3 seconds. Anyone else feel that? Kim asked, her breath visible inside her helmet, despite the suit's environmental controls. Wright checked his equipment. EM field strength just spiked. Nothing dangerous yet, but it's unusual. There's no power source down here that should generate this kind of field. The elevator slowed as it approached level 7, and when the doors opened, the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. The corridor beyond was empty, but showed signs of recent activity. A coffee cup still steaming on a desk, a computer terminal logged in but unattended. A chair overturned as if someone had left in a hurry. Ghost town, Silva muttered, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Mike's radio crackled. General Blackwood's voice, distorted by distance and interference. Alpha Team, Level 7 was evacuated 12 hours ago. You should have clear passage to Level 8. Proceed with caution. They moved out of the elevator in tactical formation. Mike and Ramirez on point, Kim and Jackson covering flanks, Volkov and Wright on rear guard, Silva in the protected center. Their footsteps echoed on the metal floor, each sound amplified by the empty silence. Then, without warning, every digital watch on every team member stopped simultaneously. Not died, stopped. Frozen at exactly 3:33. The hell? Jackson tapped his watch, which had been running perfectly 5 seconds ago. Now it displayed 3:33 and refused to change. The second hand stuck mid-tick. Kim checked her suit's HUD. Internal chronometer is fine, it's just the watches. Wright pulled out a handheld EM sensor, frowning at the readings. This doesn't make sense. There's a localized temporal distortion, or something that looks like temporal distortion. Or, he trailed off, staring at his equipment as if it had personally betrayed him. Or what? Mike demanded. Wright looked up, and for the first time since Mike had met him, the unflappable engineer looked genuinely scared. Or something is actively manipulating electromagnetic fields in ways that affect quartz oscillation, which means whatever's down here isn't just generating an EM field. It's controlling one with precision fine enough to target specific devices while leaving others untouched. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Something with that level of control wasn't just powerful, it was intelligent. Ramirez crossed himself a third time, muttering something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. Nobody mocked him now. The elevator doors closed behind them with a pneumatic hiss that sounded too much like breathing. They were committed now. The only way forward was down to level 8, down to whatever was waiting. The elevator descent from level 7 to level 8 took longer than it should have. Mike counted the seconds, 37 of them, for what should have been a 15-second drop. The cables groaned under strain that didn't match their cargo weight. The lights inside the elevator flickered twice, and in those moments of darkness, Mike could have sworn he saw light filtering up from below, faint, golden, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then the elevator shuddered to a stop with a metallic shriek that made everyone's hands move to their weapons. The level indicator showed L8. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The doors remained closed. Then slowly, they began to part. Darkness beyond. Total, absolute darkness that the elevator's lights couldn't seem to penetrate, as if the black itself was swallowing photons. Mike raised his hand, clicking on his helmet-mounted flashlight. The beam stabbed forward into the corridor and died after 6 feet, absorbed by nothing Mike could see. One by one, the team activated their lights. One by one, the beams died in that impenetrable dark. "Equipment failure?" Silva asked, his voice tight. Wright checked his instruments. "No, lights are functioning perfectly. Something out there is absorbing the light, or canceling it, or..." He stopped. Everyone stopped. Because at the far end of the corridor, perhaps 50 meters away, a light had begun to pulse. Not the harsh white of their flashlights, but something softer, golden, warm. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like the beating of an enormous heart, growing brighter with each pulse, growing closer. Kim's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the team's synchronized breathing. "My God, it's coming toward us." The light vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the team standing in the elevator doorway with weapons raised and hearts hammering against ribs. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then, hesitantly, Jackson clicked his flashlight again. This time, it worked. The beam cut through the darkness like a sword through silk, illuminating a corridor that looked simultaneously normal and profoundly wrong. "Lights are back," Kim confirmed, her own beam joining Jackson's to sweep the hallway. The corridor stretched ahead perhaps 100 feet before terminating at a sealed blast door marked with warnings in 3 languages. But it was the walls that made Mike's skin crawl. The reinforced steel plating that lined every surface wasn't smooth anymore. It was covered in patterns, intricate geometric designs that looked almost like circuit boards or mandala art, except they were carved into metal that should have required industrial equipment to even scratch. The patterns covered everything: walls, ceiling, floor, even the exposed pipes and conduits that ran along the corridor's length. They were beautiful in the way that fractals were beautiful. Infinitely complex, mathematically perfect, and utterly alien to human design. "Everyone seeing this?" Mike asked, needing confirmation that he wasn't hallucinating. 6 voices affirmed. Whatever had done this, they were all seeing the same thing. Wright approached the nearest wall, extending a gloved hand toward the patterns, with the careful deliberation of a man defusing a bomb. His fingers hovered an inch from the surface, and his suit's sensors began chirping softly. "Boss, you need to see this." Mike moved up beside him, studying the wall where Wright's scanner was focused. Up close, the patterns were even more disturbing. The metal hadn't been cut or etched. It had been melted and resolidified into these perfect geometric forms, as if someone had taken a welding torch with the precision of a surgical laser and rewritten the molecular structure of the steel itself. To melt steel like this, you'd need sustained temperatures around 2800 to 3000 degrees Fahrenheit, Wright said, his voice carrying the analytical detachment of a man retreating into facts, because facts were safer than implications. He pressed his palm flat against the patterned metal and jerked back immediately. "It's cold, not room temperature cold. Cold like it's been refrigerated, maybe 45 degrees. Volkov knelt down, examining where the patterns continued onto the floor. "It's like, how you say, frost patterns on window, but in metal, in steel." He looked up at Mike, his weathered face grave. "This is not technology. This is something else." They proceeded down the corridor in tactical formation, weapons trained on shadows that shouldn't have been threatening but somehow were. Every few feet, the patterns changed, shifting from geometric precision to something that looked almost organic, like the branching of tree roots or the spiral of a nautilus shell. Silva kept muttering measurements under his breath, trying to quantify the unquantifiable. 30 feet down the corridor, they found the first door standing open. The room beyond had been a control station. Mike could see the banks of computer terminals, the ergonomic chairs, the coffee maker on a small table with 3 mugs still sitting beside it, and he could see the bodies. 3 scientists in white lab coats, seated at their workstations as if they'd simply decided to take a nap mid-shift. No blood, no visible injuries, no signs of struggle or distress. Just 3 people who had stopped living while going about their work. "Check for pulse," Mike ordered, though he already knew what Silva would find. The medic moved from body to body, placing fingers against necks, checking for breath sounds. After 30 seconds, he looked up and shook his head. Dead. All 3. Body temperature suggests they've been deceased for approximately 12 to 14 hours, but there's no apparent cause of death. No trauma, no discoloration, no foam around the mouth that would suggest poisoning or chemical exposure. Jackson moved to the computer terminals, studying the screens that were still active, still displaying data as if their operators might return at any moment. "Boss, you're going to want to see this." The main monitor showed a graph, electromagnetic radiation levels plotted over time. The readings started normal, baseline levels you'd expect in any research facility. Then, at timestamp 14:23:17, the same time the entity had appeared on the security footage, the line went vertical, shooting off the top of the graph into territory marked "Beyond Scale Limit." Below the graph, text scrolled in automated log format. Warning: radiation pattern does not match any known natural or artificial source. Composition: non-material. Repeat: radiation source appears to be non-material in nature. Recommend immediate evacuation. The last line was timestamped 14:24:03, less than a minute after the entity appeared. Mike imagined these 3 scientists staring at their screens, seeing readings that defied physics, trying to process the impossible in the seconds before their hearts simply stopped. On the desk beside the keyboard, a notebook lay open. The handwriting was neat, controlled, the penmanship of someone educated and methodical. But the final entry, dated yesterday, was written in a hand that had started to shake. It's not hostile. It's not even aware of us the way we're aware of ants. We're trying to measure something that exists in dimensions we can't perceive, like a 2-dimensional creature, trying to understand depth. It's not that we're seeing something alien. We're seeing something divine, and our minds aren't built to process divinity. The readings don't make sense because we're using tools designed to measure matter, and what's down here transcends matter. God help us. Or maybe God is here, and that's the problem. "Everyone out," Mike ordered, suddenly wanting to be anywhere but in this room with 3 corpses and a journal that suggested they'd died from seeing too much truth. The team filed back into the corridor, and Mike noticed that Ramirez had stopped walking. The big Marine stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, his rifle hanging loose in his grip, staring at nothing. "Ramirez?" Mike called. No response. "Sergeant Ramirez, report." Still nothing. Mike approached carefully, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. Ramirez flinched as if waking from a dream, and when he turned to face Mike, there were tears streaming down his face inside his helmet. "Boss, I don't know what's happening. He struggled for words, his voice thick with emotion. "I feel like I'm homesick, but not for any place I've ever been. For somewhere I've never been, but should have been. For something I lost before I was born." His hands were shaking. "Does that make any sense?" "It doesn't make any sense." Silva moved in with a medical scanner, checking Ramirez's vitals. Elevated heart rate, increased endorphin production, heightened activity in the amygdala and hippocampus. He's experiencing intense emotional response, but there's no neurological damage. The medic looked baffled. It's like someone reached into his brain and turned on every longing receptor simultaneously. Kim had pulled out a compass, old school, analog, the kind that worked without batteries or electronics, and was watching the needle with growing alarm. "This isn't possible," she muttered. Mike looked over her shoulder. The compass needle was spinning, rotating slowly clockwise like the second hand of a clock, making one complete revolution every 5 seconds. Then, abruptly, it stopped, pointing straight up, toward the ceiling, toward the surface, toward the sky 8 levels above them. "Magnetic north is up." Wright came over to look, pulling out his own compass. Same result, spinning, then pointing upward. The magnetic field here is completely disrupted. Or, he paused, reconsidering, or there's a massive magnetic source directly above us that's overwhelming Earth's natural field. But there's nothing up there except more levels of this facility. Volkov spoke quietly. Unless source is not in facility. Unless source is above facility. Higher than building. Higher than Earth. He didn't finish the thought, but everyone understood. Higher than physical space. The supernatural didn't play by the rules of magnetism, but apparently it affected them anyway. The compass, designed to point toward magnetic north, toward something fundamental in Earth's structure, was now pointing toward something it perceived as even more fundamental, even more true. Mike's radio crackled to life, startling everyone. General Blackwood's voice came through, distorted by static and distance. "Alpha Team, this is Command. Report status." Mike pressed the transmit button on his helmet. "Command, this is Alpha Actual. We're on level 8. We've found 3 bodies. Scientists, cardiac arrest, no apparent cause. The facility is showing severe structural anomalies and electromagnetic disruption. Whatever came through here rewrote the walls and killed people just by being present." 3 seconds of silence. Not the silence of dead air, but the silence of someone on the other end processing impossible information. Then Blackwood's voice returned. "Copy that, Alpha Actual. Continue to level 9. Target is still contained in Chamber 9 Delta. You are cleared to engage with Theta devices." Mike was about to acknowledge when the radio crackled again. But this time the voice wasn't Blackwood's. It wasn't mechanical or military or human. It was something else. Soft, ageless, without gender or accent. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A voice that bypassed Mike's ears and resonated directly in the bones of his skull. "They cannot help you where you are going, Miguel." The radio went dead. Not static, not signal loss, just absolute, complete silence. For 5 heartbeats, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. Then all 6 team members started talking at once. "Did you hear that? What the hell was that? That wasn't the general. How did it know your name?" Mike raised his hand for silence, his mind racing. The voice had used Miguel, not Mike, not Sergeant Donovan, but the Spanish version of his name that only his grandmother had used, the name from the Bible, the name of the Archangel, the name he'd abandoned along with his faith. He checked his radio. Dead. Right checked the communication array. All channels dark, as if something had reached through the electromagnetic spectrum and simply turned off their ability to call for help. They were alone now. 80 meters underground, cut off from command, surrounded by the evidence of something that killed with its mere presence, and that something knew Mike's name. Knew the name even he didn't use anymore. "Check your equipment," Mike ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady even as every instinct screamed at him to abort, to retreat, to get his people out of this place. "We continue to level 9. We complete the mission." But even as he said it, he wondered, were they hunting this entity? Or had it been waiting for them, waiting for him, all along? The patterns on the walls seemed to pulse softly, like the breathing of some vast organism, and somewhere below them, on level 9, something that called itself an angel and killed like a god was waiting. The stairwell to level 9 shouldn't have existed. According to the facility schematics, Dr. Chen had shown them, the only access between level 8 and level 9 was a single reinforced elevator designed to transport equipment too sensitive for regular passage. But here, at the end of the corridor past the control room with its 3 dead scientists, was a stairwell that the blueprints had never mentioned. Spiral metal stairs descending into darkness, with emergency lighting that flickered weakly every few seconds. Mike approached cautiously, his rifle raised, and that's when he saw the door, or rather, what remained of it. The entrance to level 9 had been secured by a blast door, the kind used in nuclear facilities and military bunkers, 40 centimeters of reinforced steel with locking bolts as thick as a man's arm. The kind of door designed to withstand direct hits from bunker-buster missiles. That door was now open, hanging at an impossible angle from hinges that looked like they'd been made of taffy instead of hardened alloy. But it wasn't broken. It wasn't exploded or melted or cut. It was peeled back, the 40 centimeters of solid steel curled like a page in a book, the metal twisted in spirals that should have required industrial machinery and hours of work. Someone, or something, had opened this door the way a child opens a candy wrapper. Jackson approached the door, running his gloved hand along the twisted metal, his expression moving from professional assessment to naked disbelief. "This isn't possible. You understand that, right, boss? This isn't possible." He knocked on the curled steel, producing a dull thunk. 40 centimeters of boron carbide steel alloy, rated to withstand 2,000 psi of explosive force. You'd need a shaped nuclear charge to breach this, and even then, you'd shatter it. Not do this. He gestured helplessly at the spiraled metal. Wright joined him, pulling out a handheld spectrometer and scanning the door's surface. No heat signatures, no residual explosive compounds, no evidence of cutting tools or chemical dissolution. The molecular structure has been, it's been reorganized. Like someone reached into the atomic bonds and just told them to be somewhere else. He looked at Mike, his engineer's mind clearly struggling to process data that violated every law of physics he'd ever studied. "Boss, whatever did this doesn't use force. It doesn't cut or melt or explode. It just changes things. Changes them at a fundamental level. That's not technology. That's not even advanced technology. That's something else entirely." Volkov stood back from the door, crossing himself orthodox style, right to left instead of left to right. "Is miracle," he said simply, "or opposite of miracle. Same power, different intention." They descended the spiral stairs in single file, Mike on point with Ramirez covering rear, everyone's lights painting chaotic shadows on walls that showed more of those impossible geometric patterns. The stairs seemed to go on forever, 30 steps, 40, 50, far more than should have been necessary to descend a single level. Mike counted 63 steps before the stairs finally terminated at a landing that opened into a vast chamber. The room beyond was enormous, easily 100 feet across and 2 stories tall, with catwalks crisscrossing overhead and banks of computer equipment lining the walls. This was clearly a command center, designed to coordinate whatever happened on level 9. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination, casting everything in blood-red tones. And in the center of the room, directly beneath where the catwalks intersected, kneeling on the bare concrete floor, was a man. "Contact!" Kim called out, her rifle snapping to ready position. "Single individual, appears non-hostile, not moving." They approached in tactical formation, spreading out to cover multiple angles. As they got closer, Mike could see more details. White lab coat, identification badge clipped to the breast pocket, hands positioned in his lap holding something. The man didn't react to their approach, didn't turn his head or acknowledge their presence in any way. He just knelt there, perfectly still, staring upward at the ceiling with eyes that didn't blink. "Sir, this is U.S. military," Mike called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "We need you to identify yourself and show us your hands." No response, not even a flicker of recognition. Mike moved closer, circling to get a better angle, and felt his stomach drop when he saw the man's face. The expression was wrong. Fundamentally, biologically wrong. The human face wasn't designed to show that particular combination of emotions simultaneously: terror and peace, absolute existential horror and complete spiritual rapture. The man's eyes were wide, pupils dilated to the point where almost no iris was visible, and they were locked on some point on the ceiling that, as far as Mike could see, contained nothing but concrete and fluorescent light fixtures. His mouth was slightly open, frozen mid-breath or mid-prayer, and he wasn't breathing. Silva moved in with his medical scanner, checking for vital signs. No pulse, no respiration, body temperature approximately 20 degrees below ambient. Time of death, I'd estimate 12 to 14 hours ago. Rigor mortis has already passed, which is unusual given the timeline. The medic's voice was professionally calm, but Mike could hear the underlying tension. "What's in his hands?" Mike asked. Silva carefully lifted the corpse's hands. They moved stiffly, locked in position by death, revealing what the man had been clutching: a rosary, wooden beads, simple and worn with use, with a small crucifix dangling from the end. Wright had moved to check the man's identification badge, photographing it with his helmet camera. Dr. Elias Cohn, Chief Research Scientist, Level 9 Operations, Security Clearance, Omega-9, which I didn't even know existed. He pulled out his tablet, accessing the personnel database Dr. Chen had uploaded to their systems. According to his file, Dr. Cohn was... Wright paused, reading then rereading. "Boss, according to his file, Dr. Cohn was Jewish, Orthodox Jewish. His personnel records show he requested specific dietary accommodations for kosher food and time off for high holy days." Mike looked at the rosary in the dead man's hands. Catholic, unmistakably Catholic, the kind his own grandmother had carried to Mass every Sunday. "So why is he holding a rosary?" Kim asked the question they were all thinking. Ramirez, still visibly shaken from his earlier emotional episode, moved closer to examine the beads. "This is old, well used. See how the wood is worn smooth on certain beads? The ones you use most often in prayer, the Hail Marys. Someone prayed with this rosary for years." He looked at Mike. "Boss, this wasn't some random object he grabbed. He knew how to use it. The beads are positioned between his fingers exactly how you'd hold them during prayer. A Jewish scientist had died clutching a Catholic rosary." The paradox hung in the air like smoke. Then Kim noticed the wall. "Boss, look at this." Behind Dr. Aya, Cohn's kneeling form, the concrete wall showed marks, fresh scratches, deep gouges that had torn through the painted surface to expose bare concrete beneath. The scratches formed words, crude and desperate, carved by someone who had clawed at solid concrete with their bare hands until their fingers bled. The words were in Latin, Sanctus, 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 over and over, covering a section of wall 6 feet wide. Holy, holy, holy. The Trisagion, the oldest hymn in Christian liturgy, dating back to the 1st century. The words the angels sang before the throne of God in Isaiah's vision. Silva examined Dr. Cohn's hands, carefully turning them over. The fingertips were shredded, nails broken and torn, dried blood under what remained of them. He did this, carved these words into concrete with his bare hands. The medic's voice was quiet, awed. The pain would have been excruciating. "You don't do this unless you're in a state of absolute psychological break, unless something has overridden every pain response in your body." Wright photographed the wall, his camera flash making the shadows jump. "Why Latin? Why this phrase specifically?" Ramirez answered, his voice rough. "It's what the seraphim say. In Isaiah chapter 6, when the prophet sees God's throne, the angels cover their faces with their wings and call out, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus.'" He looked at Dr. Cohn's body. He saw something, and he needed to write what it said. Silva had pulled out his advanced medical scanner, running a full spectral analysis on Dr. Cohn's body. The device beeped and chimed, processing data, and when the results came through, the medic's face went pale. "Boss, I'm reading something impossible here. According to this scan, at the moment of death, Dr. Cohn's brain was producing serotonin, endorphins, dopamine, and oxytocin at levels that would require, I don't even know what would require these levels. The measurements are literally off the scale." He looked up from his scanner, and Mike saw genuine fear in the man's eyes. To put this in perspective, a normal orgasm produces about 100 units of combined neurochemical pleasure response. What Dr. Cohn was experiencing was reading at over 100,000 units. He died in a state of pleasure so intense it would be neurologically impossible to sustain. His brain essentially overloaded from pure ecstasy. The implications settled over the team like a shroud. Whatever Dr. Cohn had seen, whatever had written those patterns on the walls and peeled back that 40-centimeter door, it had killed him by making him feel too much joy, by showing him something so beautiful, so fundamentally perfect, that his human nervous system couldn't process it and simply shut down. He hadn't died in pain. He died happy, happier than any human being had ever been, and that was somehow more terrifying than violence would have been. Mike noticed a tablet lying on the floor next to Dr. Cohn's knee, its screen still glowing faintly. He picked it up carefully, noting the battery indicator showed only 3% remaining. It had been recording for hours. The screen showed a paused video file, timestamp indicating it had been recorded yesterday at 14:27:51, just minutes after the entity had appeared. Mike pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly handheld, showing Dr. Cohn's face from a low angle as if he'd propped the tablet on the floor facing upward. For the first few seconds, Cohn was speaking normally, clinically, like a scientist documenting an experiment. "This is Dr. Elias Cohn, 2:27 p.m. The entity has entered Chamber 9 Delta. I am maintaining observation distance of 40 meters. Initial readings are..." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes went wide. The camera angle shifted as if he jerked backward, and now Mike could see Cohn's face more clearly. The change was immediate and total, from scientist to believer, in the space of a single heartbeat. When Cohn spoke again, his voice was breaking, tears streaming down his face. "My God, you're real. You're actually real. All these years, all my life, I thought. I thought it was just stories, just human need for meaning in chaos. But you're real. His hands came up to his face, covering his mouth. I was wrong. About everything. About all of it. Hashem, forgive me. God, forgive me. I spent 40 years studying physics, trying to explain the universe without you, and you were here the whole time. You were always here. The light began to fill the frame. Golden, warm, impossible. Dr. Cohn's last words were barely a whisper. Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. Then the screen went white. The video ended. Suddenly, Volkov's voice cut through the silence, sharp with alarm. Contact! Level 9! Everyone spun, weapons up, lights converging on the stairwell they'd descended. But there was nothing there, just empty stairs leading down to darkness. Then they heard it, from below, from Level 9 proper, beyond this command center, deeper in the facility. A voice, not speaking, singing. The sound was unlike anything Mike had ever heard. Not male, not female, not human. It resonated in frequencies that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and vibrate in his chest cavity, in his bones, in the spaces between his thoughts. The language was unknown. Not English, not Hebrew, not Latin, not anything from Earth. But somehow, impossibly, Mike understood it. Not the words, but the essence, the meaning. The voice was singing praise. Endless, eternal, unwavering praise. And it was coming from Level 9, where something that called itself an angel was waiting for them. The singing stopped the moment Mike's hand touched the door to Level 9. Not a gradual fade, an immediate cessation, like someone had hit a pause button on reality itself. The door was marked with warnings in 6 languages, biohazard symbols, and a keypad that required a 16-digit access code. Mike stared at the keypad, realizing he had no code, no way to proceed. Behind him, the team had regrouped, weapons ready, every face showing the strain of the past hour. Then, without anyone touching it, the keypad's lights flickered green. The heavy locks disengaged with a series of mechanical clunks. The door swung inward, smooth and silent on perfectly balanced hinges, revealing darkness beyond. "Did you do that?" Wright asked, his voice tight. Mike shook his head. He'd touched nothing, entered nothing. The door had simply decided to open, for him. Kim checked her tablet, frowning. "I'm getting massive interference. All our remote sensors are down. Camera feeds are dead. We're going in blind." But the door remained open, waiting, like a mouth inviting them to step inside. Mike felt his pulse hammering in his temples. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to abort, to get his people out of this place. But Emma's face floated in his mind, her gap-toothed smile, her innocence. Whatever was down here knew his name, had called to him. He had to see this through. They crossed the threshold in tactical formation, and the moment the last member, Ramirez, stepped through, the door swung shut behind them with a pneumatic hiss that sounded too much like a sigh. The corridor beyond was short, maybe 30 feet, terminating at another door marked, simply, Chamber 9 Delta. But as they advanced, their equipment began to die. Kim's tablet screen went black. Jackson's rifle's electronic sight flickered and failed, reverting to iron sights. Silva's medical scanner emitted a single sad beep and shut down completely. Wright's electromagnetic sensor simply sparked once and went dark, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its circuits. "What the hell?" Wright smacked the device against his palm. Nothing. He pulled out a backup handheld unit, dead on arrival. Even their helmet cameras, the ones recording everything for review topside, had stopped recording, their indicator lights dark. Mike checked his own equipment. Rifle sight, dead. Helmet HUD, dead. Radio, dead. Communications were completely severed. They were cut off from command, from backup, from any hope of reinforcement. The only piece of equipment that still showed active status was the Theta device, the EMP weapon in its reinforced case on Mike's hip. Its indicator light pulsed green, steady and strong, as if it were immune to whatever force was killing everything else. "This isn't random failure," Wright said, examining his dead equipment with growing alarm. "Military-grade electronics don't just die simultaneously unless there's a massive EMP, and we'd have felt that. This is selective. This is," he struggled for the word, "intentional. Something is choosing what functions and what doesn't." Volkov had his orthodox prayer rope out, a simple loop of knotted wool, and was moving the knots through his fingers, lips moving in silent prayer. Silva was breathing heavily, his medical training warring with something primal that told him they shouldn't be here. Kim had her hand on the door to Chamber 9 Delta, but she wasn't pushing it open. She was just standing there, palm flat against the metal, and Mike could see her hand trembling. "I can feel it," she whispered, "through the door. Something on the other side is, I don't know how to describe it. It's like standing next to a jet engine, but instead of sound or heat, it's presence, pure presence." Ramirez had started praying aloud, his voice barely audible. "Padre nuestro, que estás en el cielo, santificado sea tu nombre." The Our Father, in Spanish, the language of his childhood. Jackson had taken 3 steps back from the door, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "Boss, I don't think we should go in there. I really don't think we should go in there." But Mike was already moving forward, past Kim, his hand closing on the door handle. It was cold, ice cold, cold enough that he felt it even through his glove. He turned the handle and pushed. The door opened onto a space that defied the blueprints, the schematics, everything they'd been told about Level 9's dimensions. It was vast, a cathedral carved from steel and concrete, rising up at least 50 feet to a vaulted ceiling supported by massive pillars. The space was easily 200 feet across, far larger than should have been possible given the facility's footprint. Emergency lighting cast everything in deep blue tones, creating shadows that seemed to breathe and pulse. The architecture was wrong. Angles that didn't quite meet properly. Perspectives that hurt to look at directly, as if whoever had designed this space had been working from blueprints drawn in more than 3 dimensions. And in the center of it all, dominating the chamber like an altar in a cathedral, stood a cylindrical containment cell, 40 feet tall, 20 feet in diameter, constructed of glass or crystal, or something transparent that caught and bent the light in impossible ways. The containment cell's glass was intact, not a crack, not a scratch visible anywhere on its surface. But the door, a massive sliding portal that should have required computer-controlled hydraulics to operate, stood wide open from the inside. Mike's team filed in behind him, and that's when the reaction started. Kim made it 3 steps into the chamber before her knees buckled and she collapsed, not violently but gently, as if her legs had simply forgotten how to support her weight. She was crying, sobbing actually, tears streaming down her face inside her helmet. I can't look at it. It's too much. There's too much." Her words dissolved into incoherent gasping. Jackson turned away suddenly and vomited, the sound grotesque inside his helmet, his body heaving. But Mike noticed something. Jackson wasn't sick. The vomit was clear, just water and bile, as if his body was simply rejecting sensory input it couldn't process. Silva, Wright, and Volkov had stopped moving entirely, frozen mid-step like statues, their eyes fixed on the containment cell's interior, not blinking, barely breathing, just staring. Ramirez was the only one still functional, but only because he'd closed his eyes completely and was praying at full volume now. "Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo, santificado sea tu nombre, venga a nosotros tu reino." The same prayer, over and over, a lifeline of familiar words in an ocean of the incomprehensible. And Mike realized something that made his blood run cold. He was the only one who could look directly at what was inside the containment cell. The only one whose mind wasn't shutting down from the sight of it. The entity stood in the center of the open containment cell, and Mike's brain struggled to process what his eyes were reporting. It was roughly humanoid in the way that a child's stick figure drawing is humanoid. The basic shape was there, but simplified, idealized, perfected beyond anything that had ever walked on Earth. Approximately 8 feet tall, though its exact height was difficult to judge because it didn't quite occupy space the way solid objects were supposed to. Its form was made of light, not glowing like a light bulb or reflecting light like metal, but actually constructed from light itself, light that somehow had substance and shape without being solid. The light didn't illuminate the chamber the way normal light should. It contained itself, kept itself tight to the entity's form, creating a paradox that made Mike's eyes water when he tried to focus on the edges. The entity had limbs, 2 arms, 2 legs, but they were too perfect, proportioned according to mathematics that human evolution had never discovered. And the wings, 6 of them, massive and terrible, spreading from its back and sides in an arrangement that should have been awkward but was instead perfect, inevitable, as if this was how wings had always meant to exist, and birds had just gotten the blueprint wrong. The wings were partially folded, covering much of the entity's torso, their surfaces showing geometric patterns that hurt to look at, fractals within fractals, recursing into infinity. Mike forced himself to look at the entity's face. and immediately understood why the others couldn't. A human face is one configuration of features, one arrangement of eyes, nose, mouth. This face was all configurations simultaneously. Mike saw an old man with a beard, a young woman with kind eyes, a child's innocent smile, his grandmother's weathered features, his daughter's gap-toothed grin, all layered atop each other like 1,000 photographs exposed on the same film. The face was male and female, and neither and both. It was every race, every age, every expression of human emotion that had ever existed, all present at once, all equally real. But the eyes, oh God, the eyes. Mike had described them in his mind as all the sunrises in history happening simultaneously, and even that wasn't adequate. The eyes weren't organs, they were events. They were infinite depth that somehow fit into finite space. Looking into those eyes was like staring into the moment of creation, into the heart of stars, into the spaces between thoughts where consciousness lived. Mike felt his sense of self beginning to dissolve, felt the boundaries between Mike and not Mike starting to blur, and had to look away before he lost himself entirely. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing at 180 beats per minute. He was experiencing every symptom of terror, and yet he wasn't afraid. Not exactly. What he felt was closer to awe, but awe so intense it manifested as fear because humans had no other framework for processing it. The entity moved for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. One of its wings, the upper right one, unfolded slightly, extending outward maybe 3 feet. The motion was fluid, graceful, and utterly alien, moving in ways that wings shouldn't be able to move, articulating through angles that 3-dimensional space didn't contain. And with that movement came wind, impossible wind. They were 90 meters underground in a sealed facility with climate control and no connection to the surface. There was no wind. There couldn't be wind. But Mike felt it nonetheless. Warm air washing over him, carrying a scent he couldn't identify. Something like incense and ozone and desert rain all mixed together. The wind touched his face, passed through his helmet, as if the physical barrier didn't exist, and he tasted it on his tongue, cinnamon and copper and something older than words. Behind him, Kim was still crying, Jackson was still heaving, Ramirez was still praying. None of them could see what Mike was seeing. Or perhaps they could see it, but their minds were protecting them by shutting down, by refusing to process the impossible. Then it spoke. Not with sound. Sound required air vibration, vocal cords, physics. This was something else. The words appeared directly in Mike's consciousness, bypassing his ears entirely, resonating in the spaces between his thoughts, in the quantum foam where matter and energy and consciousness blurred together. The voice was male and female and neither. It was ancient and newborn. It was a whisper and a shout and a song all at once. Miguel Donovan. Mike's breath caught. Not Mike. Miguel. The name from his baptism. The name his grandmother had called him. The name of the archangel. I did not come to be captured. I came because you clamored. Mike found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. I didn't call for anything. I didn't pray. I don't even believe. The entity's wings shifted, all 6 of them moving in a pattern that created harmonics in the air, music without sound. Not you, but someone you love, someone whose prayer cannot be ignored, someone who asked me to show you that you are seen. Mike opened his mouth to speak, to demand answers, to assert some kind of control over this impossible situation. But before he could form words, the entity's voice filled his mind again, gentle but absolute. You need not speak aloud. I hear thoughts as you hear sound. The translation from neural impulse to meaning is immediate. Speak with your mind, Miguel, and I will understand. Mike felt violated, the intimacy of it, the lack of barrier between his consciousness and this thing. But he formed the thought, shaped it deliberately, and projected it outward. What are you? The entity's wings shifted, creating those impossible harmonics again. Your language lacks precision for what I am. The closest approximation would be messenger, though even that carries connotations of servitude and simplicity that do not capture the full nature of my existence. The entity paused, and Mike felt it considering how to communicate across the vast gulf between human and whatever this was. In ancient times, your people called us Mal-Ak, Malak in Hebrew. The word passed through Greek as agelos, angelos. Your modern English renders it as angel, Though centuries of human art have distorted our true nature into something more palatable, more human, we are not the cherubs with harps your painters imagined. We are what we have always been, the will of the divine made manifest, operating in the spaces between your physics and your understanding. Mike's military training, his years of dealing with psyops and enemy propaganda, kicked in automatically. Angels aren't real, they're mythology. Comforting stories humans invented to make sense of a random universe. Psychological coping mechanisms for dealing with mortality and meaninglessness. He thought it aggressively, defensively, as if rational skepticism could be armor against what he was experiencing. The entity didn't recoil or show offense. If anything, Mike sensed something like patient understanding radiating from it. You stopped believing on August 17, 2014. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. 1423 local time. You received intelligence that high-value targets were meeting in a compound on the outskirts of the city. The intelligence was wrong. The meeting was a family gathering, a wedding celebration. The strike killed 23 civilians, including 7 children. You carried a girl no older than your Emma from the rubble. Her name was Raza. She died in your arms. Mike's breath stopped. His heart felt like it was being crushed in a fist. Nobody knew that name. The official reports had listed casualties as numbers, not names. He'd never told anyone about the little girl, about her final gasping breaths, about the way her blood had soaked through his gloves. How do you know that name? The entity moved closer, not walking, but simply occupying a different position in space, as if distance was a suggestion rather than a rule. Mike felt no fear at its approach, only that overwhelming awe that masqueraded as terror. I know because I was there, Miguel. I am always there. At every death, at every birth, at every moment of human suffering and joy, you asked what I am. I am a witness. I am a shepherd. I am one of the many who stand between your realm and the source of all light. Mike felt his jaw clenching, anger rising hot in his chest. You were there. You watched children die, and did nothing. The entity's 6 wings folded inward slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed sorrow. I did not watch them die, Miguel. I carried them home. Would you like to see? Would you like to know what I witnessed that day? Before Mike could answer, before he could refuse or accept, the chamber around him dissolved. He was no longer in level 9. He was back in Kandahar, dust in his mouth, the sun brutal overhead, the smell of smoke and blood and burning metal filling his lungs. But he was seeing it differently now, seeing it through eyes that perceived more than 3 dimensions, that saw the spiritual reality underlying the physical. The explosion happened again. Mike watched the compound collapse, watched the walls crumble inward, watched debris and fire tear through flesh that should have been celebrating life. He wanted to look away, to escape this memory that had haunted him for 11 years, but he couldn't. He had to watch. But this time, he saw what he'd missed before. As each body fell, as each life ended, there was light. Soft, golden light that appeared at the moment of death, wrapping around the dying like a blanket, like gentle hands catching a falling child. The little girl, Raza, her body broken and bleeding in Mike's younger self's arms, wasn't alone. There was a figure beside her, luminous and winged, gathering her spirit as it separated from her shattered flesh. The figure was singing something Mike couldn't quite hear, and Raza's face, her actual face, not the pain-twisted mask of her dying moments, relaxed into peace, into joy. He watched as winged figures moved through the rubble, collecting souls like fireflies in cupped hands, carrying them upward toward something Mike's human eyes couldn't quite perceive, a brightness that made the desert sun look dim by comparison. And he heard the voice, vast and terrible and infinitely kind. They are with me now. Their pain has ended. Their true lives are beginning. The flesh was temporary. What I have given them is eternal. Mike was back in level 9, gasping for air, tears streaming down his face. That doesn't change anything, he screamed aloud, his mental control shattered by rage and grief. They still died. Those children still felt pain. Their parents still lost them. Raza still bled out in my arms. God still let it happen. His voice echoed in the vast chamber, and behind him, he could hear Ramirez's prayers intensifying, Kim's sobbing growing louder. But Mike didn't care. 11 years of suppressed anguish came pouring out. If God is real, if angels are real, if any of this is real, then why didn't you stop it? Why let innocent people die? Why let me carry those orders? Why let me live with that guilt? The entity remained perfectly still, absorbing Mike's fury without flinching, without judgment. When it spoke again, its voice was softer, sadder. Free will, Miguel. The greatest gift and the cruelest burden. God does not force, does not compel, does not override the choices of the created. Humans were given will, true will, which means they must be free to choose evil as well as good. The men who issued those orders chose. The intelligence officers who failed to verify the target chose. Every step that led to that moment was a choice made by free beings. Mike wanted to rage, to argue, but the entity continued. God could have made automatons, beings programmed to choose only good, incapable of causing harm. But love without choice is not love. It is programming. Worship without free will is not worship. It is compulsion. So the divine stepped back, allowed choice, knowing that choice would bring suffering. And yes, Miguel, that means innocent people die, children suffer, wars rage, humans choose darkness. But the alternative, a universe of puppets acting out predetermined scripts, would be a prison, not paradise. Would you want Emma to love you because she had no choice? Or because she freely chose to? The words hit Mike like a physical blow. He thought of Emma, of her spontaneous hugs, her genuine laughter, her choice to pray for him even when he'd given up on God. A programmed daughter would be a hollow mockery. But the pain, he started, is real, the entity acknowledged, and temporary. The physical suffering of a lifetime is a heartbeat compared to eternity. Every soul I carried from that compound is alive now in ways that flesh never allowed. More aware, more themselves, more capable of joy than they ever were in bodies limited by 3 dimensions and linear time. Their deaths were tragedy. Their current existence is triumph. Behind Mike, something was happening to his team. Ramirez had stopped praying, not from fear, but because his attention had been captured by something only he could see. His face showed the same paradoxical expression Mike had seen on Dr. Cohn, terror and ecstasy intertwined. "Papa," Ramirez whispered in Spanish, his voice breaking. "Papa, is that you?" He was looking at something in front of him, something invisible to Mike's eyes, tears streaming freely. You're proud of me? After everything I've done, all the men I've killed, you're proud." Kim had stopped sobbing and was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hands pressed to her mouth, staring at empty air with wonder. "Sarah, oh my God, Sarah, you're so beautiful. You're not sick anymore. It doesn't hurt anymore?" Her sister's name. Kim had told Mike about her once. The kid's sister who died at 12 from leukemia, a death that had driven Kim to become a medic, then a SEAL, trying to save others she couldn't save then. Jackson was backing away from something, shaking his head. No, I can't. I don't deserve forgiveness. You don't understand what I did in Mosul, what I had to do. I'm not worth saving." But his face showed that whatever he was seeing, whoever he was seeing, wasn't agreeing with his self-condemnation. The entity spoke into Mike's mind. "I am showing them what they need most to see. Not deception, not illusion. Truth that their human eyes could not perceive before this moment." Mike steadied himself, forcing his rational mind to engage despite the emotional chaos. "Why are you here? Why allow yourself to be detected, to be locked in this facility? Why let them try to capture you?" The entity turned, all of it turned, wings and body and those infinite eyes, to face Mike directly. All 6 wings unfolded simultaneously, creating a display that filled Mike's entire field of vision with geometric perfection and impossible beauty. Because 3 days ago, at 8:32 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a child interrupted the plans of heaven with a prayer. The entity's wings pulsed with light, and suddenly Mike was seeing his own house, his own daughter's bedroom. Emma kneeling beside her bed in her unicorn pajamas, hands clasped together, eyes squeezed shut. Her voice came through clearly, preserved perfectly, in whatever cosmic recording the entity was sharing. "Dear God, my papai doesn't go to church anymore. He said you don't care, but I know you care. You have to care, because you're God. Please, God, show my papa that you're still there. Show him an angel like Grandma used to talk about. Show him you didn't leave him. Amen." The vision ended. Mike felt like he'd been struck by lightning. His daughter, his little girl, had prayed for him, had asked God to send proof, and God had answered, had sent an actual angel to a classified military facility, had orchestrated this entire impossible encounter. A child's prayer has power you cannot imagine, the entity said softly. Because children ask without doubt, without negotiation, without hedging their requests with, "If it be your will," Emma asked. And so I came. For you, Miguel. Because you are loved. Because you are seen. Because even when you stopped believing, heaven never stopped reaching for you. The vision that had shown Emma praying faded, but Mike could still see it burned into his retinas, like the after-image of staring at the sun. His daughter, his little girl with her gap-toothed smile, and her absolute certainty that God was listening. "Show me again," Mike thought, his mental voice raw with emotion. "Please, I need to see it again." The entity's wings folded inward, cradling Mike's consciousness like hands around a candle flame, and the vision returned, but fuller this time, with every detail crystallized. Emma's bedroom, 3 days ago, 8:32 p.m. His daughter kneeling beside her bed in those ridiculous unicorn pajamas Sarah had bought her, the ones with the sparkly horn on the hood. Her small hands were pressed together, fingers interlaced the way Mike's grandmother had taught him decades ago, back when prayer had been as natural as breathing. Emma's eyes were squeezed shut with the fierce concentration of childhood, her lips moving as she shaped words she believed would reach heaven. And standing in the doorway, Mike could see Sarah, his wife, watching their daughter with an expression that mixed pride and sadness. Sarah knew. She knew Emma was praying for him, for the man who'd stopped believing, who'd stopped going to church, who'd told his daughter that Daddy just doesn't think God is listening anymore. Emma's voice came through clearly, preserved perfectly in whatever cosmic archive the entity had accessed. "Dear God," she paused, then started again with more formality, the way she'd been taught. "Querido Deus, it's me, Emma Grace Donovan. I'm 6 years old and I live at 247 Oak Street in Clarksville." Mike almost laughed through his tears, his daughter giving God her address, as if the creator of the universe needed GPS coordinates. "My papai, my daddy, he doesn't go to church anymore. He stopped after he came back from the war. Mommy says he's working through something, but I heard him tell Uncle James that you don't care about people anymore." Emma's small voice cracked slightly. "But that can't be right. You're God. You have to care. You made everything. You made my papai. You wouldn't just stop caring about him, right?" She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "So I'm asking you, God, please show my papai that you're still there. Show him something he can't explain away. Show him an angel, like the ones Grandma used to tell me about. The real kind, not the baby ones in my coloring books. Show him you didn't leave him. Please. Amen." She opened her eyes, looked toward the ceiling with absolute confidence, and whispered, "Thank you for listening." "I know you'll do it. Good night, God." The vision ended and Mike found himself on his knees. He didn't remember falling, but there he was, kneeling on the cold floor of level 9, his rifle forgotten beside him, tears streaming down his face inside his helmet. She prayed for me. My little girl prayed for me." The entity moved closer, its presence somehow both overwhelming and comforting, like standing too close to a bonfire on a winter night. Children's prayers carry weight that adults have forgotten. Adults hedge their requests with doubt, with "if it be your will," with uncertainty born of disappointment and failed expectations. Children ask with certainty, with faith so pure it needs no qualification. Emma did not pray, "if you're real," or "if you have time." She prayed, "Please do this," with absolute conviction that you would hear and answer. That kind of faith moves mountains, Miguel, literally and metaphorically. Mike wiped his face with his gloved hand, trying to process this. "So all of this, the facility detecting you, the 7 scientists dying, me being called here, this was because my 6-year-old daughter said a bedtime prayer. The entity's wings created those impossible harmonics again, and Mike recognized the sound now. It was laughter, not mocking, joyful. You say, 'Just a bedtime prayer,' as if such things are small. Nothing is small when offered with genuine faith. Emma's prayer reached the throne of God, and I was sent in response. This was not accident. This was answer." Mike's mind was reeling, trying to reconstruct everything he'd been told. "Wait, the briefing said you appeared 14 hours ago, that you breached the facility, that the government detected an intrusion." The entity's form pulsed with light, and Mike felt understanding flow into him like water filling a vessel. "I permitted myself to be detected. I chose the location, the timing, the method of revelation. Your government did not discover me. I revealed myself to them, knowing they would respond according to their nature, knowing they would see anomaly and think weapon, knowing they would call their best soldiers, knowing they would call you. The implications crashed over Mike like a wave. The breach wasn't a breach. The containment wasn't containment. The entity had orchestrated every step, had walked into this facility the way someone might walk onto a stage, had allowed itself to be seen by scientists who would die from the seeing, had waited patiently in this chamber for Mike to arrive. All because a 6-year-old girl had asked God to show her daddy an angel. You did all this for a child's prayer? Mike thought, still struggling to accept it. You let 7 people die. Let the government think they'd captured something. Let yourself be imprisoned in this place. For Emma, the entity's 6 wings spread fully, filling Mike's entire field of vision with geometric perfection that hurt to look at, but was impossible to look away from. Every sincere prayer moves mountains in ways you cannot perceive. Every genuine cry to heaven rearranges the architecture of reality in subtle ways. But prayers from pure hearts, from children, from the broken, from those who ask without agenda, these have power that makes stars tremble. Emma prayed for you with absolute faith. How could such a prayer not be answered? Mike felt something inside him beginning to crack. A wall he'd built brick by brick over 11 years starting to crumble. But why me? I abandoned the faith. I cursed God. I told Emma that prayers were just words we say to make ourselves feel better. I stopped believing. I gave up. Why would God answer a prayer about someone who gave up on him? The entity moved even closer, and Mike felt warmth radiating from it. Not physical heat, but something that touched deeper than skin. Precisely because you gave up, Miguel. God does not seek the self-righteous, the ones who believe they have achieved perfection. He seeks the broken, the wounded, the ones who walked away because they were hurt, not because they were arrogant. You did not reject God because you thought yourself superior. You rejected God because you were in pain, because you had seen suffering and could not reconcile it with love. That is honest doubt. That is the kind of seeking that can be answered. Mike thought of all the years he'd spent angry, all the Sundays he'd avoided church, all the times he'd looked at his grandmother's Bible and felt nothing but bitterness. But I wasn't seeking. I was hiding. The entity's voice was gentle. You were hiding from pain. That is not the same as running from truth. Your anger at God was proof you still believed he should exist. You do not rage at something you think is fiction. You raged at God because part of you, deep beneath the hurt, still knew he was real and still expected him to be good. That contradiction, that was your seeking, even if you did not name it as such. Mike felt tears coming again, but this time not from grief, from something else. Something that felt like hope beginning to bloom in soil that had been scorched and barren for more than a decade. Behind him, his team was still experiencing their own revelations. Ramirez was having a full conversation with his deceased father in rapid Spanish. Kim was laughing and crying simultaneously as she talked to her sister. Jackson had stopped retreating and was now sitting on the floor, head in his hands, saying, okay, I believe you, I'm sorry, over and over. Even Wright and Silva, the skeptics, had stopped trying to measure and analyze and were simply experiencing whatever they were being shown. The 7 scientists, Mike thought suddenly, Dr. Cohn and the others. You said they weren't killed, but they're dead. I saw the bodies. The entity's form shifted, its light dimming slightly, as if in respect for the dead. Their bodies ceased functioning, but they, their consciousness, their souls, the essential self that is more than flesh, they are more alive now than they ever were in physical form. They saw truth in its fullness, unfiltered by the limitations of human neurology. They experienced the divine presence in magnitude that flesh cannot sustain. Dr. Cohn was Jewish his entire life, searching for God in mathematics and physics. In his final moments, he found what he had always sought. The rosary in his hands was not his. It appeared in his grasp as he died, a gift, a welcome, a symbol that all paths that genuinely seek God eventually arrive at the same destination. He scratched Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus into the wall because those were the words he heard angels singing as he transcended. He died in grace, Miguel, in absolute perfect grace. All 7 did. Their families will grieve, and that grief is real. But the men and women they mourn are celebrating. They have graduated from the narrow confines of 3 dimensions and linear time. They are home. Mike wanted to argue, wanted to say that death was death, that those families would never see their loved ones again. But he remembered the vision of Kandahar, remembered seeing Raza's soul lifted by light, remembered the voice saying, "Their pain has ended." A burst of static shattered the moment. Mike's radio, dead for the past 30 minutes, suddenly crackled to life with such violence that he flinched. General Blackwood's voice came through, distorted and angry. "Alpha Team, this is command. I don't know what the hell is happening down there, but your biometrics are showing severe anomalies and your equipment is offline. Whatever that thing is doing to you, you need to engage immediately. Activate Theta device. That is a direct order." Mike's hand instinctively went to the device on his hip, the EMP weapon, the only piece of equipment that had continued functioning, the tool designed to freeze the entity's bioelectric field. Blackwood's voice continued. "You have 60 seconds to activate, Sergeant Donovan. After that, we consider Alpha Team compromised and will initiate Protocol Omega. Do you understand? You activate that device or you and your team are considered hostile assets. 60 seconds, starting now." The radio died again, leaving only the countdown ticking in Mike's head. 58 seconds, 57, 56. Mike looked at the Theta device, then at the entity standing before him, the angel that had orchestrated its own capture, that had let itself be imprisoned, that had come here because his daughter had prayed. The entity's 6 wings folded inward, and its voice was calm, accepting. "Now you choose, Miguel, as you have always had the freedom to choose. I will not resist. I will not fight. I will not defend myself. The decision is yours, and yours alone. Free will must be honored, even when the choice is to destroy me. What will you do?" The countdown was ticking in Mike's head. 45 seconds now, but a question burned brighter than the urgency. What is this place? What do they really do here? He thought it at the entity, at the angel, at whatever this being was that had allowed itself to be imprisoned 90 meters underground. If you came here on purpose, if you orchestrated all of this, then you know what Area 53 is, what they're studying, what they want from you. The entity's wings shifted, and Mike felt something like sadness radiating from it. "I know precisely what this place is. I have watched it grow from noble intentions into corruption, from seeking understanding into seeking dominance. Would you like to see? Would you like to know what your government has been building while the world focuses on alien conspiracies and little green men?" Mike nodded, and the entity's presence expanded, filling his consciousness like water filling a vessel. "Then witness. See what I have seen." The chamber around Mike dissolved, replaced by a vision that spanned decades, a historical record preserved in whatever cosmic memory angels possessed. He was no longer Sergeant Michael Donovan standing in Level 9. He was an observer outside time, watching the birth and evolution of humanity's attempt to cage God. The vision began in 1952, in an office in Washington, D.C., where men in suits sat around a table covered with classified documents. Mike recognized the style: Cold War paranoia, the desperate scramble for advantage over the Soviets. But these documents weren't about nuclear weapons or spy networks. They were about incidents. The miracle of Fatima, where 70,000 witnesses saw the sun dance in the sky. The inexplicable recovery of terminal patients after visiting Lourdes. Stigmata appearing on a nun in New Mexico with no physical explanation. Documented cases of levitation, of saints whose bodies didn't decay, of holy relics that emitted measurable energy that shouldn't exist. A gray-haired man at the head of the table, Mike saw his nameplate, Director Hammond, spoke with grim certainty. "Gentlemen, we've been looking at this wrong. We've been dismissing these events as religious hysteria, as mass delusion. But the data doesn't support that conclusion. Something real is happening, something measurable, something that violates every law of physics we understand." He stood, pointing to a map on the wall. "The Soviets are investigating this too. If they weaponize the supernatural before we do, God help us. We need a facility, completely off-book, deeper black than anything we've ever attempted. We need Area 53. The vision accelerated, compressing decades into moments. Mike watched as construction began in the Nevada desert, watched as the facility burrowed deeper and deeper into the earth like a technological termite mound. Level by level, the complex grew. The early years were almost innocent. Scientists genuinely trying to understand phenomena that contradicted their materialist worldview. Level 3 housed fragments of the Shroud of Turin, carefully preserved in vacuum-sealed containers. Mike watched researchers in the 1960s discover that the fabric emitted a form of radiation that their instruments couldn't classify. Not alpha, not beta, not gamma, something else. Something that seemed to exist at the boundary between matter and energy. Level 4 contained dozens of religious artifacts from every faith. Buddhist relics that levitated in sealed chambers. Hindu statues that wept oil with medicinal properties. Fragments of the true cross that generated measurable healing effects in laboratory mice. The scientists were documenting, cataloging, trying to build a taxonomy of the miraculous. They weren't trying to weaponize yet. They were trying to understand. But Mike could see the moment when understanding shifted to exploitation. 1978, when a new director took over. General Marcus Blackwood, young and ambitious, the same man who now commanded from the surface. The vision focused on Blackwood's first briefing to his staff, his voice ringing with military certainty. For 26 years, this facility has been passive observation. We've collected, we've documented, we've tried to understand. That ends today. Understanding without application is wasted potential. We don't need to know why these artifacts work. We need to know how to make them work for us. Mike watched as the research shifted. Level 6 became dedicated to attempted communication with divine entities. Massive antenna arrays trying to broadcast prayers at specific frequencies. Computers analyzing biblical texts for hidden patterns that might be activation codes for miracles. They were trying to reverse engineer God. Level 7 took it further. Containment protocols for spiritual manifestations. The files Mike saw were horrifying. Documented encounters with angels that had resulted in dozens of deaths. Each attempt to capture or control ending in failure and catastrophe. But instead of taking that as a warning, Blackwood took it as a challenge. The vision showed him in 1987, standing before a congressional committee in a closed-door session. The entities we've encountered are powerful, yes, but they're not invincible. They follow rules. Different rules than we're used to, but rules nonetheless. With the right technology, we can contain them, study them, harvest their power. Imagine an army that doesn't need weapons because the soldiers themselves are weapons. Imagine faith as a deployable asset. The vision shifted to level 8, and Mike saw failed experiments spanning decades. Scientists dying from exposure to divine presence, their bodies unable to handle the spiritual radiation. Containment fields that worked for minutes before shattering, releasing bursts of energy that killed everyone in the vicinity. The hubris was staggering. Humans thinking they could cage what had existed before matter, before time, before the universe itself. And then, 3 years ago, the breakthrough, Project Seraphim, a new generation of containment technology, quantum-locked fields that could theoretically hold something that existed partially outside three-dimensional space. The Theta device, an EMP weapon modified with principles derived from studying the Turin Shroud's radiation signature, designed to disrupt bioelectric fields even in entities that didn't have conventional biology. Blackwood's presentation to whoever funded this nightmare. We're ready. The next time one of these entities manifests, we'll be ready to capture it, to study it, to understand how to replicate its power. And then, gentlemen, America will possess the ultimate weapon, divine fire, made portable, made controllable, made ours. The vision showed the device being constructed, not to capture, Mike realized with dawning horror, but to destroy and dissect. They wanted to kill an angel and study its corpse. Mike was back in level 9, the vision ending, and he wanted to vomit. You want to turn angels into weapons. You want to militarize God. The entity's form pulsed with that sad light. Not the first time humanity has tried. The Tower of Babel, an attempt to reach heaven by force, to make themselves equal to God through technology. The result was confusion, the scattering of languages, the humbling of pride. The Ark of the Covenant, built as a throne for the divine presence, was carried into battle as a weapon, used to strike fear into enemies, used as a tool of war instead of worship. God allowed it for a time, then removed his presence from it. The pattern repeats throughout history. Humans encounter the divine, experience awe, and immediately ask, how can we control this? How can we own this? How can we use this against our enemies? You cannot cage what is infinite. You cannot weaponize what is love itself, but you can try, and in trying, you can corrupt your own souls. Mike thought of Dr. Cohn, scratching Latin into concrete with shredded fingers. Thought of 7 scientists dying in ecstasy because they'd seen too much truth. They were trying to capture you, to kill you, to turn you into a weapon, and you came anyway. Why? The entity's answer was simple. For Emma, for you, because one child's prayer outweighs a government's ambitions. Behind Mike, movement. His team was recovering consciousness, their visions ending, their minds returning from whatever revelations they'd been shown. Ramirez was the first to speak, his voice thick with emotion. Boss, I saw my mom. She died when I was 8. Cancer. I never got to say goodbye, but she was there. She was right there, and she told me she's been watching me, that she's proud of me, that everything I've done, even the hard things, even the killing, she understands. She forgives me. He was crying openly, not caring who saw. Kim sat up, her face radiant despite the tears. My sister Sarah, she showed me. She's not sick anymore. She's not in pain. She's more alive than we are. She told me to stop carrying guilt for surviving when she didn't. She told me it was her time, and she's happy now. Jackson was shaking, his hands trembling. I saw everyone I killed in Mosul. Everyone. I thought I'd be damned for those deaths. But they understood. They said it wasn't personal. They said war is humans choosing evil, and soldiers are just caught in the machinery. They forgave me. How can they forgive me? The entity's voice filled all their minds simultaneously. Because genuine repentance is always met with genuine forgiveness. Because grudges belong to the temporal world, and they have transcended it. Because God's mercy is vaster than human comprehension can hold. Wright had crawled to where Mike stood, pulling himself up with obvious effort. He reached for the theta device on Mike's hip, his engineer's mind working despite the spiritual overload he'd just experienced. Boss, let me see that thing. Mike unclipped it, handed it over. Wright pulled out a small toolkit. Somehow he'd kept it even through the equipment failures, and opened the device's casing. His face went pale as he studied the internal circuitry. Oh God, oh Jesus. Boss, this isn't a capture device. Look, he pointed to components Mike couldn't identify. These are shaped charge configurations. This is a disruptor matrix. It's not designed to freeze bioelectric fields. It's designed to shatter them, to cascade fail every quantum bond in the target. They told us this was for capture, but the schematics are clear. This is a kill weapon. They want us to destroy this entity and bring back the pieces for study. The implications crashed over Mike like a tidal wave. The government didn't want to contain an angel. They wanted to murder one and dissect its remains. Wanted to turn divine anatomy into blueprints for weapons. The radio crackled again. T-minus 30 seconds. Activate now, Sergeant Donovan, or Protocol Omega initiates. You and your team will be sealed in Level 9 and eliminated. This is your final warning. 30 seconds. Mike looked at his team. 6 faces looking back at him, waiting for orders. Ramirez spoke softly. Boss, what do we do? Mike's hand closed around the theta device. His finger found the trigger. The entity stood perfectly still, its 6 wings folded, its impossible eyes watching Mike with what could only be described as patience. Its voice was gentle, sad, accepting. Choose, Miguel, as you have always been free to choose. I will not resist. I will not fight. I will not defend myself. Your free will is sacred even when you choose to destroy me. What will you be? What will you choose? 20 seconds. The countdown wasn't just in Mike's head anymore. It was in his pulse, in his breathing, in the tremor of his hands as he gripped the theta device. The radio crackled with Blackwood's voice, stripped of all pretense of calm command. Sergeant Donovan, you are receiving a direct order from a superior officer. Activate that device immediately, or I will consider you and your entire team compromised assets. Do you understand what that means? Protocol Scorched Earth. We will seal Level 9 and flood it with VX nerve agent. You will all die down there, choking on your own fluids, paralyzed and conscious until the very end. Is that what you want? Is that what you're choosing for your people? Wright's face had gone chalk white. Boss, Scorched Earth isn't a bluff. I've seen the schematics. There are gas deployment systems built into every level below 6. Blackwood can activate them from the surface. We'd have maybe 90 seconds before the VX saturates the air, and our suits aren't rated for chemical weapons. We'd die. All of us. 18 seconds. Mike felt the weight of the device in his hands. Not heavy, maybe 2 pounds, but it felt like holding the anchor that would either save them or damn them. His finger rested on the trigger guard, not quite touching the activation button, not quite pulling away. His mind was fragmenting under the pressure. thoughts coming in rapid-fire bursts that felt more like bullets than reasoning. 15 years of service. 15 years of following orders, even the ones that kept me awake at night. Soldiers don't get to pick which orders they obey. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. But underneath that military conditioning, another voice. Emma. Oh God, Emma. If I disobey, if I'm marked as compromised, I'll never see her again. They'll lock me in some black site prison or worse. She'll grow up without a father. She'll think I abandoned her. She prayed for me, and I'll repay that by disappearing from her life forever. 15 seconds. Mike's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the device with both palms to keep it steady. He spoke aloud, his voice rough. My whole career has been following orders, even the bad ones, even the ones that killed innocent people, because that's what soldiers do. We trust the chain of command. We execute the mission. We don't question. His eyes were locked on the entity, on the angel standing perfectly still, wings folded, waiting. But if I do this, if I destroy an actual angel, if I murder something holy because a general told me to, what kind of man does that make me? What kind of father? Jackson moved closer, his voice carrying the same desperate rationality Mike had heard in interrogation rooms when subjects were trying to convince themselves of lies. Boss, think about this logically. We don't know what this thing really is. Yes, it showed us visions, but advanced aliens could do that too. Psychological manipulation, quantum entangled hallucinations. There are explanations that don't require us to believe in angels and God and all that. He gestured at the entity. It could be playing us, could be making us see dead relatives and religious imagery because it knows that's how to break human resistance. For all we know, we're being mentally compromised right now, and killing it might be the only way to break the influence. The argument was reasonable, logical, exactly what Mike's training had prepared him to consider. 12 seconds. But before Mike could respond, the entity spoke, its voice filling every mind in the chamber simultaneously. He speaks truth in a way you do not know with certainty. Faith never comes with irrefutable proof. If it did, it would not be faith. It would be knowledge. And knowledge, while valuable, does not transform. Only faith transforms. Only choosing to believe despite uncertainty changes the human soul. If I proved myself beyond all doubt, removed all possibility of skepticism, I would rob you of the choice that makes the choice meaningful. 10 seconds. Kim struggled to her feet, her hand moving to her sidearm, not drawing it, but touching it, ready. Mike, I'm sorry, but I can't let you do this. I won't. Her voice was steady despite the tears still wet on her face. I saw my sister, not a hallucination, not a trick. I saw Sarah, and she was real, and she was happy, and she was everything that matter can't be. If you destroy this angel, I'll stop you. I swear to God, I'll stop you. Ramirez moved to stand beside Kim, his rifle lowered but his stance protective. Boss, I love you like a brother. You know that. But this is a line I can't cross. This isn't some terrorist or enemy combatant. This is an actual messenger of God, literally. My mother. I saw my mother. Boss. She's been dead 26 years and I saw her and she was real. If you fire that device, you're not just following orders. You're choosing to murder something holy, and I can't be part of that. I won't. The team was fracturing before Mike's eyes. Kim and Ramirez on one side, their faith awakened and absolute. On the other side, Jackson, Volkov and Wright stood frozen, caught between duty and doubt. Silva, the medic, had his hands raised as if to say, I'm not part of this decision. 8 seconds. Everyone stand down. Mike's voice cracked like a whip. Years of command authority forcing everyone to freeze. Nobody draws a weapon. Nobody moves. This is my call. Mine alone. But even as he said it, he felt the weight crushing him. His daughter's face floated in his mind. Emma, gap-toothed and innocent, kneeling beside her bed and praying for her daddy to believe again. If he died down here, if Blackwood initiated scorched earth, she'd never know why. She'd never know that her prayer had been answered, that an angel had come, that her daddy had stood in the presence of the divine and been given the choice of a lifetime. She'd just know he'd disappeared on a classified mission and never came home. 7 seconds. Mike looked at the entity, the angel, its form flickering with that impossible light, its 6 wings now partially unfolded, creating geometric patterns that hurt to look at, but were beautiful beyond description. Why? Mike thought desperately. Why won't you defend yourself? You could stop this. You could stop all of this. You could make the choice easy by just doing something that proves you should live. Why are you leaving this to me? 6 seconds. The entity's response was gentle, infinitely patient, tinged with something that might have been sorrow or might have been love. Because God never forces, Miguel, never compels, never overrides the sacred gift of choice. If I defended myself, if I made the decision for you, you would learn nothing. You would grow nothing. Forced faith is not faith, it is coercion. Enforced righteousness is not righteousness, it is slavery. You must choose freely, even if you choose wrong, because only free choice has moral weight. Only free choice builds character. Only free choice allows love to be real. Mike wanted to scream. 5 seconds. His mind was a chaos of images. Emma praying, the girl in Kandahar dying in his arms, Sarah on their wedding day, promising to love him in sickness and health, his grandmother pressing that Bible into his hands, Dr. Cohn scratching Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus into concrete with bleeding fingers, the 7 scientists dying in ecstasy, Ramirez's mother watching over her son, Kim's sister freed from cancer's grip, all of it swirling together in a maelstrom of memory and faith and doubt and terror. 4 seconds. Mike raised the theta device, pointing it directly at the entity. His finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. The angel, if that's what it was, stood perfectly still, accepting, ready. 3 seconds. Mike's vision blurred with tears he didn't remember starting to cry. He was back in that moment in Kandahar, carrying Raza's broken body, screaming at a god he didn't believe in anymore, demanding to know why. But this time, he saw the scene complete, saw the light surrounding her, saw the winged figure carrying her soul upward, saw that death wasn't ending but transition. 2 seconds. The entity's 6 wings spread fully, all of them extending in perfect synchronization, filling the chamber with golden light that didn't illuminate but somehow made everything more real, more present, more true. The geometric patterns on the wings created harmonics in reality itself. Mike could feel them resonating in his bones, in his consciousness, in the spaces between thoughts where the soul lived. The light wasn't blinding, it was clarifying. 1 second. Mike's finger tightened on the trigger. In his mind, Emma's voice, "Dear God, show my papa that you're still there." In his heart, his grandmother's voice, "Faith isn't the absence of doubt, Miguel. It's choosing to believe anyway." In his soul, a question that had haunted him for 11 years finally getting an answer. God, are you real? Are you there? Did you ever care? 0 seconds. Mike screamed. Not words, just raw anguish and hope and terror and faith all compressed into sound. He pulled the trigger. Click. The theta device activated with a sound like reality tearing, a pulse of electromagnetic energy erupting from the weapon in Mike's hands. But in the half-second before he'd pulled the trigger, Mike had turned away from the entity, away from the angel standing in acceptance, turned toward the walls of level 9, toward the banks of servers and control systems and monitoring equipment that lined the chamber. The EMP blast hit the facility's infrastructure like the fist of an angry god. Every computer terminal exploded in showers of sparks. Every surveillance camera died. Every electronic lock, every automated system, every piece of equipment designed to monitor and control and contain the divine, all of it died simultaneously, fried beyond any hope of repair. The facility's lights flickered once, twice, then failed completely, leaving only the entity's golden glow to illuminate the chamber. And in the darkness that followed, Mike heard the most beautiful and terrible sound, the entity laughing, not mockery, not cruelty, pure joy. The sound of a prisoner whose cage had just been opened by the very guards sent to kill him. The sound of a plan coming to fruition. The sound of free will choosing correctly against all odds. The radio crackled one final time, Blackwood's voice distorted by rage and disbelief. "Donovan, what have you done?" Then the radio died too, the EMP having killed every communication system in the facility. They were alone now, cut off, free. Mike dropped the dead device, his hands still shaking, and looked at the entity, at the angel he had chosen not to kill. Its voice filled his mind, warm as sunlight. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Though you did not know you still had faith, you chose as if you did. That is the truest faith of all." The facility's emergency lighting had died with everything else, leaving only the entity's golden radiance to illuminate level 9. In that otherworldly glow, Mike could see his team's faces, some relieved, some terrified, all of them processing what he'd just done. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before the radio crackled one final time, Blackwood's voice breaking through with the fury of a man watching decades of work destroyed. "Donovan, you just committed treason against the United States of America, destruction of classified government property, sabotage of a black site operation." The general's voice was raw, stripped of military composure. "Protocol Scorched Earth is active. To -5 minutes until VX deployment. You hear me, Sergeant? 5 minutes. You and your entire team will die down there, choking on your own." The transmission died mid-sentence as the last of the communication systems failed, leaving only the hiss of dead air. Then even that went silent. The EMP had done its work thoroughly. Every electronic system within 200 meters was dead or dying, circuitry fried beyond any hope of repair. Mike dropped the smoking Theta device and looked at the entity. "I'm sorry, General Blackwood," he said aloud, though nobody could hear him now, "but I can't let you turn the sacred into a weapon. Not for America. Not for anyone." The moment of calm shattered as Wright grabbed Mike's shoulder, spinning him around with strength born of panic. "Boss, do you understand what you just did? You killed us. All of us." The engineer's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "We're 90 meters underground with no communications, no elevator power, no way out. The emergency stairs are sealed by blast doors that require electronic codes we don't have, and in—" He checked his watch, which had somehow survived the EMP. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. This entire level will be flooded with VX nerve agent. We don't have chemical suits. We'll die in seconds." Volkov was checking the doors Wright had mentioned, pulling on handles that didn't budge, examining electronic locks that showed no lights, no power, no response. "He is right. Doors are sealed. Even with explosives, we could not breach in time, and explosives would," he gestured at the sealed chamber, "would just trap us faster when gas deploys." Jackson had backed against the wall, his rifle hanging forgotten in his hands. "What the hell, Mike? What the actual hell? We trusted you and you just murdered us." His voice broke. "I've got a wife. I've got 2 kids. You just made them orphans because you couldn't follow orders." Mike stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos, his team fragmenting around him, and realized he felt no panic, no fear, just a strange certainty that had settled into his bones the moment he'd turned the weapon away from the entity. He looked past his shouting team members to the Angel standing in its open containment cell, wings still partially spread, light pulsing with each movement like the beating of a vast heart. "Can you get us out of here?" Mike asked simply, his voice cutting through the panic. The team went silent, everyone turning to look at him like he'd lost his mind. "Boss," Wright said slowly, carefully, as if speaking to someone in psychotic break, "that thing can't help us, even if it wanted to. Even if it's really an angel, and not some kind of quantum physical anomaly. The physics of—" Mike raised his hand, silencing him. "Can you?" he asked again, directly to the entity. The angel's form pulsed brighter, and its voice filled all their minds simultaneously. "I can, but not without cost. Nothing divine comes free to mortal flesh. The price of salvation is always transformation." 3 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. Mike felt his heart rate steady. What cost? The entity moved forward, not walking, but transitioning through space. One moment in the containment cell, the next standing in the center of the team, close enough that they could feel heat radiating from its form. Not physical heat, something else, something that touched deeper than skin. "To leave this place, you must pass through me, through the light that is my essence, through the divine fire that burns away all falsehood, all pretense, all the lies you tell yourselves about who you are." Its 6 wings unfolded slightly, creating patterns in the air that Mike's eyes struggled to follow. Some of you may not survive the passage with sanity intact. To see God face to face is not a blessing given lightly. It burns, it purifies, it strips away ego and doubt and sin and secrets. You will be changed, fundamentally, irreversibly changed. Transformation hurts, children of clay. It always has. Silva, the medic who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "What happens if we refuse? If we just stay here?" The entity's response was gentle. "Then you die when the gas comes. Die in peace, knowing you saw truth before the end. Or you cross through me and live, but live as different people than you were. Neither choice is wrong, but both have consequences. 2 minutes and 50 seconds remaining. The entity's voice filled the chamber again, this time with the weight of absolute authority. Each of you must choose individually. I will not compel. I will not force. Stay and die in peace, or cross through divine fire and live transformed. Choose now. Ramirez was the first to step forward, moving without hesitation, crossing himself as he approached the entity. I've already seen my mother. I've already been forgiven for everything I did in Syria, in Iraq, in all those dark places where I had to become a monster to fight monsters. If crossing through you means I get to keep that peace, then I'll cross. I'll cross through heaven itself if I have to. His voice was steady, absolute. My faith prepared me for this. My whole life prepared me for this. Kim moved next, limping slightly from where she'd collapsed earlier, but her face was set with determination. My sister Sarah died when she was 12. Cancer ate her alive while I watched helplessly. If there's even a chance, even the smallest chance that she's really with God, that she's really okay, then I have to believe. I have to cross. She looked at Mike. Boss, I saw her. Not a hallucination. Her. And she was happy. I'm crossing. 2 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. Silva surprised everyone by moving forward next. The medic, who'd been cataloging impossible phenomena with scientific detachment, who'd explained Dr. Cohn's death in terms of neurochemistry and endorphins, stood before the entity and laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and wonder. I've been an atheist for 20 years. 20 years of believing that consciousness is just neurons firing, that love is just oxytocin, that everything can be explained by chemistry and physics and biology. He gestured at the angel. But this doesn't fit in any textbook I've ever read. So either I'm insane or I've been wrong about everything. And if I'm going to be wrong, I'd rather be wrong and alive than right and dead. He stepped closer. I'm crossing. God help me. And isn't it funny that I'm saying that now? I'm crossing. Wright was next, the engineer who'd spent the last hour trying to rationalize the impossible. Mathematics is the language of God, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. I always thought that was just a poetic metaphor, but if there's design behind the equations, if there's intelligence in the math that makes galaxies spin and atoms bond, then I need to see it. I need to understand. He looked at the entity. I'm crossing. 1 minute and 45 seconds remaining. Volkov stepped forward, his weathered face calm, and spoke in his heavily accented English. In Russia, my babushka, my grandmother, she was Orthodox Christian, very devout. She'd tell me stories when I was boy, stories of saints who see God and are never same after. She say, Anton, if God ever speak to you, you listen. You not ask questions. You not doubt. You just listen. He smiled, something like peace settling over his features. I think this is God speaking, so I cross. That left Jackson, who was still pressed against the wall, shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. I can't. You don't understand. The things I did in Mosul, in Fallujah, in places that don't have names. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve to be saved. The entity turned its full attention to Jackson, and Mike saw the big soldier flinch as if physically struck. There is no sin too great for forgiveness, only pride too great to ask for it. The question is not whether you deserve mercy. The question is whether you will accept it. Jackson was sobbing now, his military bearing completely shattered. But I killed children. Not by accident, on purpose, because I was ordered to, because I thought it was necessary. How can that be forgiven? The entity's voice was infinitely gentle. By asking, by meaning it, by choosing to be better than you were. Come, child, cross through me and be cleansed. Jackson pushed off the wall, stumbling forward. Okay, I'll cross. 1 minute remaining. Mike was the last, standing alone as his team gathered around the entity, waiting. My daughter prayed for this, he said aloud, his voice steady despite everything. Emma asked God to show me he was still there, to send me an angel, and you came. He looked at the being that had orchestrated its own capture, that had let 7 scientists die seeing divine glory, that had waited patiently for him to make the right choice. I won't waste her miracle, I'm crossing. The entity's 6 wings spread fully, all of them extending simultaneously until they filled the entire chamber, until there was nothing but wings and light and impossible geometry that bent space in ways that made Mike's eyes water. Its voice resonated in all their minds. Close your eyes, open your hearts. Do not fight the light. Let it show you what you need to see. Let it burn away what you need to release. Trust. For the first time or the 1,000th time, simply trust. 30 seconds remaining. The wings began to glow brighter, the golden light intensifying to white gold, then to pure white, then to something beyond white, a color that had no name because human eyes had never been meant to perceive it. Mike closed his eyes, but the light penetrated his eyelids, penetrated his skull, penetrated his very consciousness. He felt his team around him, felt them reaching for each other's hands in the moment, before the light consumed them completely. Then the entity's wings folded inward, drawing all 7 of them into an embrace that was part physical, part spiritual, part something that language had no words for. The light exploded through them, into them, becoming them, and each member of the team began their crossing. Ramirez entered the light and found himself standing in his childhood home in San Diego, the tiny apartment where he'd grown up smelling his mother's tamales and listening to her sing hymns while she cooked. But it wasn't a memory. It was more real than memories, more present than the past should be. His mother stood at the stove, exactly as she'd looked before cancer had hollowed her out, before the chemo had stolen her hair and vitality. She turned, saw him, and her face lit with joy that made Ramirez's chest ache. "Mijo," she said in Spanish, "my son, look how strong you became. Look how far you've traveled." She moved toward him, and Ramirez tried to speak but found he couldn't, found he was crying too hard. "Mama, I killed people, so many people. I did things in the name of God and country that God should never forgive." His mother touched his face, her hand warm and solid and real. "God does not need your perfection, Carlos. He needs your honesty. You fought in wars not of your making. You carried out orders you did not choose, but you never killed with joy. You never lost your humanity. That is what matters." Around them, other figures appeared. His father, dead for a decade. His grandfather. His sister who'd died in childbirth. An uncle lost to gang violence. All of them smiling. All of them at peace. His grandfather spoke. "Welcome to understanding, mijo. Welcome to knowing that death is not ending but doorway." The light intensified and Ramirez felt something inside him break. A knot of guilt he'd carried since his first kill. A weight of shame that had lived in his chest for 20 years. It broke, and where it had been was only peace, only light, only grace. Kim entered the light and immediately felt pain. Not her pain, but Sarah's pain. The cancer that had killed her 12-year-old sister, that had made the girl's final months a nightmare of chemo and radiation and suffering that no child should endure. Kim felt it all at once, the nausea, the weakness, the burning in her veins, the way her bones had ached with malignancy. She screamed or tried to, but the light absorbed the sound. Then Sarah was there, not the wasted skeleton Kim remembered from the hospital, but Sarah as she should have been. 16 years old, healthy, radiant, alive in ways that flesh had never allowed her to be. "You carried this," Kim gasped, the pain still echoing through her. "You felt this every day, and you never stopped smiling." Sarah took Kim's hands, and the pain vanished. Not gradually, but instantly, as if it had never existed. "I felt it, but I also felt God holding me through every moment. I was never alone, even when you couldn't see him with me." Sarah smiled, and it was the same gap-toothed grin Kim remembered. "And now I don't feel it at all. Now I'm free. Now I'm everything I was meant to be." The scene shifted, and Kim saw her sister's life after death. Saw her learning, growing, experiencing dimensions of existence that physical bodies couldn't access. Saw her happy in ways that transcended human happiness. "Stop carrying guilt for my death," Sarah said firmly. "It was my time, and what came after was worth the pain of leaving." The light wrapped around Kim like a blanket, and she felt years of survivor's guilt dissolving, felt the burden she'd carried since she was 16 finally lifting. She had not failed her sister. She had never failed her sister. Sarah was fine, better than fine. Home. Silva stood in a timeline of his own life, watching himself age backward, through moments where God had reached for him, and he'd turned away. There, age 42, his wife dying of a stroke, a chaplain offering comfort, and Silva telling him, "I don't need your fairy tales." There, age 35, a patient he couldn't save, a grieving family asking him to pray with them and Silva making excuses. There, age 28, standing at his father's funeral, listening to the priest eulogize a man who'd believed with his whole heart, while Silva stood silent and skeptical. All the way back to age 22, sitting in a college philosophy class, the moment when his professor had convinced him that materialism explained everything and God was unnecessary. Each moment played out again, but this time Silva saw what he'd missed. The chaplain's hand on his shoulder radiating genuine compassion. The grieving family's faith giving them strength he'd dismissed as delusion. His father's deathbed peace that had nothing to do with painkillers. And in that college classroom, he saw now what his 22-year-old self had been blind to. The professor had been wounded, had rejected God from pain, and had passed that wound to his students like an infection. Silva fell to his knees in the light, watching his life from a perspective that saw the spiritual realm he'd denied for decades. "I was so arrogant," he whispered. "I thought if I couldn't measure it, it wasn't real. I thought consciousness was just neurons. I thought love was just chemicals. I thought—" A voice, not the entities, but something even older, something that might have been God or might have been the universe itself. "You thought with the tools you had. Now you have better tools. Now you understand. And understanding means you can never unknow, can never go back to comfortable blindness. Do you accept this burden?" Silva looked up into light that hurt, but also healed. "Yes, yes. Show me everything." And the light did. Wright found himself standing in a classroom that looked like the platonic ideal of all classrooms. Perfect desks, perfect chalkboard, perfect light filtering through perfect windows. On the chalkboard, equations wrote themselves in chalk that appeared from nowhere. The mathematics of quantum mechanics, of general relativity, of string theory, of forces and fields and particles. But as Wright watched, new equations appeared between the standard ones, mathematics that shouldn't exist, dimensions that physics didn't acknowledge, variables representing concepts like consciousness and will and divine intention. The equations were integrating the spiritual into the physical, showing how they were always meant to work together. A figure appeared beside the chalkboard, not quite human, not quite the entity, but something teaching, something showing. It pointed to an equation describing quantum entanglement. "You see randomness here, particles acting without cause. But look closer. New variables appeared. Not random, responsive. The universe observes itself. Consciousness collapses wave functions, not because observation is measurement, but because observation is participation. You are not separate from what you measure. You never were." Wright's mind was expanding, seeing patterns he'd missed, understanding that math was never just human invention. It was discovery, humans finding the language God had used to write reality. "It's all intelligent," Wright breathed, his engineer's mind euphoric with understanding. "Every equation, every physical law, every mathematical truth, they're not just descriptions of how the universe works. They're expressions of intent, of design, of," the figure smiled, "of love. Physics is not cold mechanism. It is the grammar of divine speech, and you have been learning to read it your entire life without knowing whose words you were studying." The light filled Wright's understanding, and he saw mathematics as he'd never seen it before. Not as cold logic, but as poetry, as art, as a love letter from creator to creation. Volkov stood on a battlefield. Not any specific battlefield, but every battlefield where he'd fought. Afghanistan with the Soviet army, Chechnya in the bloody 90s, Syria as a mercenary before defecting to America. The ground was covered with bodies, and Volkov recognized faces. Men he'd killed, men who'd tried to kill him, men who'd died beside him. The scene was exactly as he remembered, brutal, meaningless, a waste of human life for political games that benefited no one who did the actual dying. But then the light came, and Volkov saw what he'd never seen before. Over each fallen body, figures of light appeared, some winged like the entity, others simply luminous human forms. They gathered the dead with gentle hands, lifted them away from the mud and blood and waste, carried them towards something Volkov couldn't quite see but could feel, a warmth, a home, an ending that was also a beginning. He heard voices, the soldiers speaking as they were carried away. "It's over. The pain is over. I'm going home." A figure formed beside Volkov, and he recognized his babushka, his grandmother, dead these 30 years. The woman who'd taught him to pray when he was a boy in Vladivostok. She looked exactly as he remembered, tiny, bent with age, her head covered in a traditional scarf. "You see now, Anton?" she asked in Russian. "Death in war is still death, still grief for those left behind, still waste, but the dead are not lost, not abandoned. not forgotten. She gestured at the figures of light. God does not cause war. Humans choose war, but God catches every falling soul, redeems every senseless death, makes meaning from chaos. Volkov felt tears streaming down his face. I killed so many, babushka, so many. She touched his cheek. And now you know, they are not simply gone. Now you know every life continues. Let that knowledge change how you live what remains of yours. The light swallowed the battlefield, and Volkov felt something hard and cold inside him beginning to thaw. Jackson experienced the crossing differently, not as revelation or reunion, but as judgment. He stood in a vast space that might have been a courtroom or a theater, watching himself projected on screens that surrounded him from every angle. Every mistake, every sin, every moment of cruelty or cowardice or moral failure played out in perfect detail. He saw himself in Mosul, kicking down a door and shooting a man who'd reached for a phone, not a weapon. Saw himself in Fallujah, standing by while other soldiers brutalized prisoners. Saw himself in a dozen firefights, making the choice to shoot first and ask questions later, to treat civilians as potential threats, to let fear override humanity. "Stop," Jackson begged, falling to his knees. "Please stop. I know what I did. I know what I am." But the images continued, relentless, a catalog of all the ways he'd failed to be the man he'd wanted to be. "I don't deserve forgiveness," Jackson sobbed. "I don't deserve to be saved. I'm not—" The images froze. A voice, maybe the entity, maybe God, maybe Jackson's own conscience finally speaking truth. "You are correct. You do not deserve forgiveness. None do. Forgiveness is not earned. It is given freely to those who genuinely repent. Or it is not forgiveness at all. The question is not whether you deserve mercy. The question is, will you accept it?" Jackson looked up through his tears at the frozen images of his worst moments. "How can I? How can I just accept that those things don't matter?" The voice was gentle but firm. "They matter. They matter eternally. But you matter more. You, the person you are now, the person who regrets, who wishes he'd chosen differently, you matter more than your past. Sin is real, but repentance is also real, and my capacity to forgive is greater than your capacity to sin." The screens began to dissolve, the images fading not into darkness but into light, into something that looked like grace. "You are forgiven. Now comes the harder part, forgiving yourself." Jackson felt something break inside him, a wall he'd built between himself and God, between himself and peace. It broke, and the light rushed in to fill the void it left behind. Mike's crossing was different from all the others. He stood again in Kandahar, watching the compound collapse in slow motion, watching Raza die in his younger self's arms. But this time, the entity spoke, narrating what Mike couldn't see. This child, Raza, age 6, her death was tragedy, unnecessary, a result of human error, human choice, human warfare. God did not will this. Mike wanted to look away but couldn't. The entity continued, "But watch what her death caused. Watch the chain." The scene shifted. Mike saw himself after Kandahar, broken and grieving, questioning everything. Saw himself nearly drinking himself to death before Sarah had stopped him. Saw himself choosing to leave the military, to come home, to be present for Emma in ways he wouldn't have been if Kandahar had never happened. Then the vision expanded. Mike saw Raza's family, her mother, devastated by loss, but channeling that grief into founding a school for girls in Kabul, a school that educated hundreds of girls who otherwise would have had no opportunity. Saw Raza's father becoming an advocate for peace, his daughter's death transforming him from silent farmer to voice for reconciliation. Saw other soldiers in Mike's unit who'd been there that day, who'd been changed by seeing innocent death, who'd become better men because of the trauma. The entity's voice filled the vision. Every life touches infinite others. Every death creates ripples that reach further than human eyes can see. Raza's death was not God's will. It was human choice. But God redeems, takes even the worst tragedy, and weaves it into something that creates meaning, that touches others, that changes the world in ways both large and small. Mike saw the chain continuing. Emma existed because Mike had left the military. Emma's innocence and faith remained intact because Mike had come home when he did. Emma's prayer had been answered because she believed prayers could be answered, and her prayer had saved 7 people in level 9 from making the wrong choice. Her death wasn't meaningless, Mike whispered, understanding finally flooding through him. It was terrible, it was wrong, but it wasn't meaningless. The entity's voice was soft with something like approval. Nothing is ever truly meaningless when God is present. Not even death, not even tragedy, not even human sin. All of it can be redeemed, transformed, made into something that serves love. That is the promise. That is the hope. That is what you must carry from this moment forward. The light intensified to absolute white, and Mike felt himself dissolving into it. Felt his anger and grief and doubt all burning away in fire that hurt but also healed, that destroyed but also created, that was both death and rebirth. Then, silence, darkness, the sensation of falling, of flying, of being nowhere and everywhere. Then, impact, not painful, just the return of physical sensation, of weight, of body. Mike's eyes snapped open, and he gasped air into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe, coughed, rolled onto his side in grass that shouldn't exist 90 meters underground. Mike woke to the smell of sage and desert sand, his face pressed against earth that shouldn't exist 90 meters underground. He gasped, his lungs filling with air that tasted of open sky and freedom, and rolled onto his back to see blue stretching endlessly above him. Not the steel ceiling of level 9, but actual sky, with clouds drifting lazy and white across afternoon sun. He sat up too fast, his head spinning, and took in his surroundings with the trained efficiency of a soldier, assessing threat level. Flat desert terrain, scattered Joshua trees, mountains visible on the horizon, and his entire team scattered around him in various states of consciousness. Kim was already sitting up, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Ramirez was on his knees, crossing himself and muttering prayers in Spanish. Jackson lay flat on his back, eyes open but unfocused, tears streaming down his temples into the sand. Silva, Wright, and Volkov were stirring, groaning, pushing themselves upright with the confused movements of people waking from dreams, too vivid to be dreams. They were 15 kilometers from where Area 53's entrance had been. Mike recognized the landscape from the drive-in, recognized the distinctive rock formation that marked the facility's perimeter. They were outside, they were alive, and somehow, impossibly, they'd been transported through solid earth and deposited here like children being carried to bed after falling asleep in the car. Wright was the first to speak, his engineer's mind immediately trying to quantify the impossible. "Boss, my watch says it's 2:47 p.m. We entered level 9 at 8:30 a.m. That's 6 hours and 17 minutes. He looked around at the desert, at the team, at the sky. The scorched earth protocol had a 5-minute countdown. The gas should have deployed at 8:35 a.m. We should be dead. He pulled out his equipment, most of it fried by the EMP, but his handheld GPS still functioned. We're 15.3 kilometers from the facility entrance. There's no way we walked this far. No tracks in the sand, no signs of vehicle transport. We were just placed here." Ramirez had found something lying in the sand a few feet away, a military-grade tablet, still powered on, its screen showing a single file icon labeled, "For Alpha Team, Eyes Only." His hands shook as he picked it up. "Boss, you need to see this." They gathered around as Ramirez opened the file. The video that played showed level 9 from a fixed security camera angle, the same chamber they'd left, now empty, except for the entity still standing in its open containment cell. The timestamp showed 8:36 a.m., 1 minute after they'd crossed through the light. As they watched, the elevator doors opened and 20 soldiers in full tactical gear poured in, weapons raised, moving with the precise coordination of a team that had trained for exactly this scenario. The video showed what happened next in silent, grainy detail, the soldiers advancing, shouting orders at the entity that the camera's audio couldn't capture. Then, one by one, without the entity moving or making any visible gesture, every soldier dropped to their knees, not collapsing, kneeling, deliberately, reverently, as if they'd encountered something that stripped away all pretense of military protocol and left only the human need to acknowledge the sacred. The timestamp showed 8:39 a.m. Gas deployment would begin in seconds. Mike watched as white vapor began seeping from vents in the ceiling, the VX nerve agent that should have killed everyone in the chamber within 90 seconds. But the entity's 6 wings spread fully, and the gas stopped. Not dispersed, not blown away. It simply stopped flowing, hanging in the air like frozen fog. Then the same golden white light that had transported Alpha Team filled the chamber. and when it faded, the 20 soldiers were gone, vanished, transported to safety the same way Mike's team had been. The entity remained alone in the chamber as more gas poured in, enough to kill 100 people, but the light around the entity kept it at bay, creating a sphere of safety in a sea of death. Then the entity turned, looked directly at the camera, with all 6 of its wings folded inward, and simply faded. Not exploded, not destroyed, just ceased to be visible, returning to wherever angels went when they weren't manifesting in the physical world. The video ended. The screen went black. They sat in silence for a long moment, processing what they'd seen. Then Silva spoke, his voice carrying wonder that had replaced 20 years of skepticism. It saved them, the second team. It could have left them to die. They were there to capture it, to kill it, to turn it into a weapon, but it saved them anyway. Kim wiped her face. Her expression transformed from the haunted look she'd carried since they'd met to something approaching peace. My sister told me, when I saw her in the light, she told me that's what love is. Not conditional, not transactional, just constant, even when we don't deserve it, especially when we don't deserve it. The changes in each team member were visible, palpable, as if the light had rewritten something fundamental in their molecular structure. Ramirez sat with perfect stillness, the restless energy that had always animated him replaced by calm certainty. "I'm not afraid anymore," he said simply. "Not of death, not of judgment, not of anything. I know where I'm going now. I know what's waiting." Wright was sketching equations in the sand with his finger, muttering about divine mathematics and intelligent design, his entire worldview restructured by what he'd experienced. Volkov just smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made him look 20 years younger. "My babushka was right," he said in his thick accent. "God speaks, you listen." Simple. Jackson had stopped crying, but his face showed the aftermath of emotional earthquake. Foundations destroyed, structure rebuilt. Stronger now, but different. "I forgave myself," he said quietly. Finally. 48 hours later, Mike sat in a nondescript office in a building that officially didn't exist, listening to General Blackwood explain how history would remember, or rather, wouldn't remember, what had happened at Area 53. "Catastrophic gas line explosion," Blackwood said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "That's the official story. A tragedy, yes, but entirely mundane. No angels, no divine intervention, no supernatural anything." He slid papers across the desk. Honorable discharge documents, non-disclosure agreements, and what amounted to hush money disguised as medical compensation for psychological trauma. "You and your team will sign these. You will never speak of what happened in Level 9. You will never discuss Area 53, the research conducted there, or the entities we were studying. You will take your money, your discharge, and you will disappear into civilian life." Blackwood leaned forward, his face haggard. He'd aged a decade in 2 days. "You destroyed 60 years of research, Sergeant. 60 years of humanity's attempt to understand and harness the divine. You set us back generations in our ability to defend against metaphysical threats. You sabotaged the most important scientific endeavor in human history because you had a religious experience." Mike met the general's eyes steadily. "It wasn't science, General, and it was never yours to control. You were trying to cage God, turn angels into weapons. That's not defense, that's blasphemy." Blackwood's jaw clenched. "Nobody will believe you if you talk. We'll make you look insane." Mike smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in years. "I don't need everyone to believe me, sir. Just the ones who are ready to hear it, and that's enough." 3 days later, Mike stood on his front porch in Clarksville, Tennessee, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the doorknob. He'd been gone less than a week, but it felt like years, felt like he'd aged and regressed simultaneously, died and been reborn in the light of an angel's wings. He opened the door, and before he could process the familiar sight of his living room, Emma came running from the kitchen, her unicorn slippers slapping against hardwood, her gap-toothed grin wide enough to split her face. "Popeye!" she screamed, launching herself at him with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old who knows she'll be caught. Mike caught her, lifting her up and holding her so tight he worried he might hurt her, but he couldn't make himself let go. "Hi, Princess," he managed through tears he didn't try to hide. "I missed you so much." Emma pulled back to look at his face, her small hands on his cheeks. "God answered, didn't he?" she whispered, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "He showed you. He showed you. He's still there." Mike couldn't speak, could only nod as tears ran freely down his face. Yes, baby. Yes, he did. And he's more real than anything I've ever seen. Sarah appeared in the doorway, and Mike saw her expression shift from relief to something else. Recognition that the man standing in her entryway was simultaneously her husband and someone changed at a fundamental level. You look different, she said softly. Mike set Emma down and moved to embrace his wife. I am different, but I'm also more myself than I've been in 11 years. Let me tell you everything. 6 months later, Mike sat in a pew at Clarksville First Baptist, the church his grandmother had attended for 50 years before her death, the church where he'd been baptized as an infant and confirmed as a teenager. He wasn't there as a speaker or a leader, just as a man trying to understand what he'd experienced, trying to integrate the impossible into the mundane rhythms of daily life. Emma sat beside him, her legs swinging freely because they didn't quite reach the floor, her clear voice rising with the congregation in a hymn Mike remembered from childhood. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Sarah held his hand, her thumb tracing circles on his palm, grounding him in the present moment even as his mind wandered to level 9, to 6 wings of impossible light, to a voice that spoke directly into his consciousness. You are loved, you are seen, you have always been seen. His team was scattered now. Ramirez had moved to San Diego to be closer to family. Kim was working with terminal cancer patients as a hospice volunteer. Silva had gone back to medical school with plans to become a chaplain. Wright was writing a book about the mathematics of faith. Volkov had returned to Russia to reconcile with family he'd abandoned decades ago, and Jackson was in therapy, healing wounds older than Area 53. But they stayed in touch, bound by shared experience that couldn't be spoken aloud, but didn't need to be. They knew, they'd all seen, they'd all been changed, and that was enough. The service ended, and Mike walked out into Tennessee sunshine, Emma's hand in his, Sarah beside him, feeling more at peace than he'd felt since before Kandahar. They'd tried to make him forget. The government, the NDAs, the money, the threats. They'd tried to convince him it had been a psychological break, a shared hallucination, anything but what it actually was. But Mike knew what he'd seen. He knew what he'd experienced. He knew the weight of Emma's small hand in his, knew the reality of his wife's love, knew the solidity of the ground beneath his feet. And he knew the entity in Level 9 had been just as real as any of those things. More real, actually, because it had shown him that reality was larger than he'd imagined, deeper than he'd believed, more meaningful than he'd dared to hope. As he walked toward the parking lot, he glanced up at the sky, just a casual look, the kind everyone does on a nice day. And for just a second, maybe less, he saw it. 6 wings silhouetted against the sun, geometric patterns too perfect to be clouds, a presence that had never left even when he'd stopped looking for it. He blinked, and it was gone. Just blue sky and white clouds and the ordinary beauty of a Sunday afternoon. But Mike smiled, because now he knew the truth. They'd always been there. The angels, the divine, the love that held the universe together. Always watching, always present, always reaching down to touch the humans who reached up with faith no bigger than a mustard seed, or with the prayer of a 6-year-old girl who believed God would listen. Emma tugged his hand. What are you smiling at, Popeye? Mike looked down at his daughter, at the miracle that had prayed him back to faith, and felt his smile widen. Just remembering something an angel told me, Princess. We're not alone. We've never been alone. We just have to look up to see.